Welcome to English Podcast. In this episode, we will understand environmental ecology through concepts, processes, and real-world relevance. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are stripping everything back. Usually, we're looking at a specific news event, a tech breakthrough, or a market trend. But today, we are looking at the machinery of the world around us. We're talking about ecology. But before you have flashbacks to high school biology and, reach that skip button, I promise you, this is not just about memorizing the parts of a flower.
No, not at all. This is about understanding the engine room of the planet.
Exactly. The engine room.
It is about understanding the relationships. I think that is the key word for today. Relationships. Nothing exists in a vacuum, certainly not in nature.
Right.
It's about the invisible wires that connect, say, a microscopic organism in a pond to a government policy document signed in a capital city 300 miles away.
And we have a massive stack of research to get through today. I mean, we are covering everything from the microscopic wars happening in a single drop of water to the huge frameworks designed to save our coastlines.
This is a big topic.
It is.
Yeah.
But I want to start with the word itself. Ecology. Because the etymology, which I found in the source material, is actually really beautiful, and it frames this whole discussion perfectly.
It really is. It comes from the Greek, oikos, which means home.
Home.
And logos, meaning study. So quite literally, ecology is the study of the home.
Study of the home of nature. I love that. It makes it feel so much less clinical,
It does.
It's not just distinct scientific observation. It's about housekeeping for the planet.
That's a great way to put it. Housekeeping. And speaking of history, the source material points out something really fascinating right off the bat.
Okay.
We tend to think of environmental science as this very modern, 20th century concern, right? Yeah,
absolutely. Like we had the Industrial Revolution, we messed everything up, and then sometime in the 1970s, we suddenly woke up and realized we needed to study it.
Right, like ecology was invented on the first Earth Day or something.
Exactly.
But the roots go way, way back. The source material references ancient Indian texts that show just a profound understanding of these concepts. We are talking about the Vedic period.
Wow. So how far back are we talking?
We're talking thousands of years. The Vedas, the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, Upanishads, all of these ancient texts contain specific references to ecological concepts.
And it wasn't just sort of spiritual or metaphorical, right? It was actually practical.
Oh, very practical. The sources mention the Charaka Samhita and the Sushruta Samhita. Now, these are ancient medical texts.
So, like the medical journals of their time?
Basically, yes. And in them, they classified animals based on their habitat, and they explicitly recognized that polluted air and water were injurious to health.
That is wild.
Isn't it?
We act like we only discovered the link between pollution and public health in the last century, but they were writing about it in ancient Sanskrit.
A direct link between the environment and human well-being established thousands of years ago.
So the mission for today, then, is to take that ancient wisdom and combine it with modern science to really understand how this home of ours actually works.
Right. And to do that, we need to start by defining what we mean by the environment.
Okay, let's do it.
And the definition is broad. It is the sum total of all living and non-living components. It is literally everything that surrounds and affects an organism during its lifetime.
Which is a lot. It's almost too big to grasp.
It is, which is why, to make sense of that huge definition, we need a map. We need to look at the levels of organization in ecology.
Okay, a hierarchy. Let's walk through it. Starts small and gets huge, I assume.
It starts with the smallest functional unit, the individual. That is the standalone organism, you, me, a single bacterium, a single pine tree.
So one unit that functions independently. Got it. Level 1.
Then you group them. Level 2 is the population. Now, this is important. A population isn't just a crowd of things.
Right. There are rules.
There are rules. It is a group of organisms of the same species, occupying a defined area at a specific time.
So all the frogs in the world is not a population. But all the bullfrogs in this specific pond in the year 2024, that is a population.
Exactly. And once you have a population, you suddenly have new variables to study that an individual doesn't have. You have things like growth rates, density, birth rates, death rates.
Immigration, emigration.
All of that. But populations don't live alone. That brings us to level 3. The community.
And this is where it gets social.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
A community is all the populations of different species that are interacting in the same space.
So now we have the bullfrogs and the dragonflies they eat and the water lilies they sit on.
And the fish and the bacteria, all of it. And interestingly, communities are usually named after the dominant plant form. So you might talk
Ah.
about a grassland community. Ah, okay. So even though there are wolves and rabbits and insects there, the grass is the anchor. It sets the stage.
The plants set the stage. And then the big one, the one everyone's heard of, the ecosystem.
The ecosystem. This is the structural unit.
This is the big leap. Because up until now, we've just been talking about living things, the biotic components. But an ecosystem is where the living beings, the biotic, interact with the physical environment, the abiotic.
The non-living stuff. The soil, the sunlight, the water flow, the minerals.
Exactly. An ecosystem is where energy and materials are exchanged. It is a functional unit. It's a factory.
The source material uses a really funny kind of meta-analogy to explain this distinction between ecology, environment, and ecosystem. It uses the Shanker IAS Academy itself as the example.
It's a helpful way to ground it for the people studying from these notes. So if the student is the individual,
And the environment is the academy as a whole. The building, the rules, the general atmosphere, the infrastructure, everything.
but the ecosystem is the specific set of circumstances immediately surrounding that one student. So it's their specific teachers, the books they're using, the other students they talk to every day.
The specific interactions. It is the functional web that they are personally caught in.
I like that. It helps ground these big abstract concepts. So an ecosystem is a functional unit. And today, we are going to dive deep, literally, into one specific type of ecosystem.
Yes, we are.
The aquatic ecosystem, the underwater world.
It's a good place to start considering water covers most of our planet. And just like we classify land biomes by temperature and rainfall, desert versus rainforest,
Right.
we classify aquatic ecosystems primarily by one thing: salt.
Salinity. How much salt is in the water?
Precisely. The sauce gives us a very clear breakdown. First, you have freshwater ecosystems. This is water with a salt content of less than 5 parts per thousand, or ppt.
So lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, all the stuff we typically think of as fresh.
Exactly, less
Yeah.
than 5 ppt. Then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have marine ecosystems.
The ocean.
Seawater, that is 35 ppt or above, shallow seas, the open ocean, deep sea vents.
But nature hates hard lines, doesn't it?
Yay.
There's always a gray area and in between.
There is always a transition zone. And that is the brackish water ecosystem. The salt content is somewhere between 5 and 35 pp.
This is where fresh and salt water mix.
Yes, this is where the magic happens. We're talking about estuaries, mangrove swamps, salt marshes. We will talk a lot more about those later because they are incredibly complex and important.
Okay, so we have the water sorted, fresh, marine, brackish.
Guys.
Now let's talk about the residents, the cast of characters as the outline puts it.
Right.
And the source material classifies aquatic organisms in a way I hadn't really thought about before. It's not by species family like fish or crustacean. It's by where they live and how they move.
It's a much more functional way to look at ecology. It helps you visualize the entire water column from top to bottom. Let's start at the very top, right at the surface.
Okay.
The Newston.
Houston. These are the floaters, right?
Right at the air-water interface. These are unattached organisms. They're either living on top of the surface tension or floating just underneath it. Think of floating plants, or even animals like water striders and certain beetles that literally spend their lives walking on water.
The Jesus lizards of the insect world.
Okay.
So that's the surface film. What's just below that? Clinging to things.
Then you have the paraphyton. I like to call these the clingers.
The clingers.
They attach themselves to the stems and leaves of rooted plants, or even to submerged rocks and logs. Sessile algae is a prime example. They basically hang on for dear life and let the water and nutrients move past them.
Okay, so floaters on top, clingers on the sides. Then we have the most famous group, the ones everyone knows about from documentaries.
The drifters.
The drifters.
Zooplankton. Now, this is a huge group. It includes both phytoplankton, which are the microscopic plants,
The base of the entire aquatic food web.
the absolute base, and the zooplankton, which are the microscopic animals that eat the phytoplankton. The key characteristic here is that their movement is controlled by the currents. They are drifters. They can't swim against the flow in any meaningful way.
Which is the key thing that distinguishes them from the next group, the nekton.
Right. The nekton are the swimmers.
Yeah.
They are the organisms powerful enough to overcome water currents and move where they want to go.
So this is everything from a large fish.
To a blue whale, even a tiny swimming insect can be nekton if it can control its own movement against the current. If you can choose where you are going, you are nekton.
And finally, you've got to have the bottom feeders, the cleanup crew.
The benthos, the bottom dwellers. They live in or on the mud, the sediment at the bottom of the body of water. Every healthy aquatic ecosystem has a well-developed benthic community, worms, clams, crabs cleaning up the mess.
Okay, so we have the cast. Newston on top, periphyton clinging to the sides, plankton drifting, nekton swimming, and benthos in the mud. It paints a really clear picture. But their lives aren't easy. The source material goes into a lot of detail about the limiting factors.
This is crucial to understand. On land, the main limiting factors are moisture and temperature. If you have enough rain and it's warm enough, life just explodes.
A tropical rainforest.
Exactly. But in water, moisture obviously isn't the problem. The two big limits are sunlight and oxygen.
Let's unpack the sunlight issue first. Because water, it acts like a filter, right?
A very effective filter. Sunlight penetration diminishes really rapidly as you go down. This creates two distinct zones in any body of water.
Okay.
The top layer is the photic zone. Photo like light. This is the upper layer where sunlight penetrates. This is where photosynthesis can happen. So this is where all the plants and phytoplankton live and produce oxygen.
And then below that, it's just dark.
It's the aphotic zone, A meaning without. No light, therefore no photosynthesis. There is only respiration happening down there.
Which means oxygen is being consumed, but not produced.
Precisely. And the transparency of the water dictates how deep that photic zone goes. If you have a lot of clay or silt from runoff, or even a huge bloom of plankton,
The water gets murky or turbid.
and that turbidity blocks the light and the photic zone shrinks, the whole factory gets smaller. And that links directly to the second big limiting factor, oxygen.
This was a shocking stat for me. I had to read it twice. The source says water holds 150 times less oxygen than an equivalent volume of air.
150 times. It's an incredibly resource-scarce environment when it comes to breathing.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker, the real problem. Warm water holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water.
That seems counterintuitive, but it explains so much. It explains why you often see fish kills during a hot summer spell. The water warms up, the oxygen levels plummet, and the fish can't breathe.
Right. But there is another phenomenon mentioned in the text that's even more dramatic and kind of scary. It's called winter kill.
Okay, tell me about this.
This is a fascinating and tragic chain of events. Imagine a shallow lake in a cold climate. Winter comes. Ice forms on the surface.
Right.
Now, if that ice is clear, black ice, some light can still get through. But if snow falls and covers that ice, it becomes an opaque white lid. It cuts off the light completely.
So the photic zone is gone. The entire lake is now in the dark. It's all aphotic.
Exactly. And what happens when there's no light?
Photosynthesis stops.
Photosynthesis shuts down. But, and this is the key, respiration continues. The fish are still breathing. The bacteria decomposing things on the bottom are still using oxygen, but the plants aren't replacing it.
It's like being locked in a room where the air vent is shut off, but everyone inside just keeps breathing. The air is going to run out.
Precisely. The oxygen levels drop and drop until there's none left. The fish suffocate and die. But because the lake is covered in a thick layer of ice and snow, we don't see it happen.
Oh, wow.
It's a silent catastrophe. It's only when the ice finally melts in the spring that all the dead fish float to the surface. That is winter kill.
That is a grim image. But it shows just how incredibly delicate that balance of light and oxygen really is in an aquatic system.
The razor's edge.
And speaking of lakes dying, let's talk about the life cycle of a lake. Because lakes aren't permanent features of the landscape, are they?
No, not at all. In geologic time, lakes are very temporary. They are born, they age, and they eventually die. Or, more accurately, they fill up.
So they're born when a depression in the land fills with water.
Right. And over time, sediment from rivers and organic matter like dead leaves and plants wash in. The lake gets shallower and shallower. Eventually, it fills up completely and becomes a marsh, and then dry land.
And this aging process is classified by how rich in nutrients the lake is.
Right. And we have a few key stages. Oligotrophic lakes are the young ones.
Oligo meaning few.
Few nutrients. These lakes are usually deep, very low in nutrients, and have stunningly clear water. Think of a pristine mountain lake, like Lake Tahoe or Crater Lake.
Beautiful, but not actually that productive in terms of life.
Correct. Then you have mesotrophic, that's middle-aged, with moderate nutrients, and finally you get to eutrophic.
These are old lakes.
Eu meaning good, so good nutrients.
In a way. They are shallow, very high in nutrients, have murky water, lots of plant life, and often very low oxygen levels at the bottom because of all the decomposition.
And this brings us to a major topic in the source material, eutrophication.
Right. The word eutrophia literally means adequate and healthy nutrition in Greek. But in modern ecology, it refers to a syndrome. It's the overfeeding of the lake.
And while this happens naturally over centuries as a lake ages,
Humans have hit the fast-forward button.
dramatically.
That is what we call cultural eutrophication. It's man-made. Instead of taking centuries, it can happen in just a few decades because of massive amounts of fertilizer runoff, nitrates and phosphates, and untreated sewage pouring into the water.
And the source material breaks down this degradation process step by step. I think we should walk through it because it is a perfect example of an ecological chain reaction. Let's do it. Step 1. A massive nutrient load enters the water. Suddenly, the algae and surface plants have an unlimited buffet.
Step 2. They flourish. You get what's called an algal bloom. The surface of the water turns into a thick green soup.
Step 3. That bloom covers the surface of the water like a dense blanket.
And here's the paradox. Here's the problem. Step 4. That blanket blocks the sunlight from reaching anything below it.
So the plants that are rooted at the bottom, the submerged vegetation, they can't photosynthesize anymore. They die.
And then it gets worse. Step 5. Now you have a huge mass of dead plants at the bottom of the lake, and bacteria start going to town, decomposing all of it.
And that process, decomposition, consumes a massive amount of oxygen.
So step 6, the bacteria use up all the dissolved oxygen in the deeper water. The water becomes anoxic.
And step 7, everything else dies. The fish, the insects, any aquatic life that needs oxygen. They suffocate. The ecosystem collapses. It creates a thick detritus layer at the bottom and eventually, over time, turns into a marsh and then land.
It is a complete cascading failure, started by just having too much of a good thing, nutrients.
Exactly.
And one of the most visible symptoms of this is that algal bloom, which is sometimes called a red tide. But the source notes that red tide is a bit of a misnomer.
It is, for a few reasons. Firstly, they aren't always red. They can be green, brown. Sometimes they don't color the water at all. Secondly, they're not associated with the tides. And thirdly, as I said, they're not always visible.
But they are definitely dangerous. The proper term is harmful algal blooms, or HADBs.
Yes. The danger lies in the toxins that some of these algae produce. They can kill fish, birds, and marine mammals in huge numbers.
But they also impact humans directly.
They do. Shellfish poisoning happens when you eat clams or mussels that have filtered these toxic algae. The shellfish are fine, but the toxins accumulate in their tissues, and for humans, it can be fatal.
And the source says you can even get sick just from being at the beach during a bloom.
Right, from breathing aerosolized toxins that get kicked up by the waves. And the source makes a very clear connection to climate change here.
Let me guess. Warmer waters.
Warmer waters plus continued nutrient enrichment from agriculture. It is a recipe for more frequent and more intense blooms.
A very dangerous combination. So you have lakes and oceans. But what about the spaces in between? The transition zones. The source material spends a lot of time on wetlands and estuaries.
As it should. They are critically important.
Let's start with wetlands. What's the definition?
Wetlands are areas that are transitional between terrestrial or land and deep water systems. The key feature is that the water table is at or near the surface for a significant part of the year.
They're often called Earth's kidneys. Why is that?
Because of the sponge effect. First, they act like a sponge for floodwaters. They absorb huge amounts of excess water, mitigating floods downstream.
Okay, that's the quantity part. What about quality?
That's the kidney part. They filter sediments and purify water. The slow-moving water and dense plant life cause pollutants and sediments to drop out of the water column. They trap them before they can reach the open water of a lake or the ocean.
The source draws a few key distinctions between wetlands and lakes. What's the main difference?
The dominant life form. Lakes are generally dominated by free-floating phytoplankton. Wetlands, on the other hand, are dominated by macrophytes.
Macro, meaning large plants, reeds, cattails, water lilies.
Exactly. This also means wetlands are highly productive, but their food chain is often detritus-based. It's based on the decomposition of all that dead plant matter. Also, wetlands have a huge capacity to absorb waste and pollutants, which lakes generally do not.
Now, in India, there's a lot of focus on protecting these areas. There's the Ramsar Convention, which is the international standard for identifying important wetlands.
Right. It sets specific criteria for identifying wetlands of national importance. Things like if they support rare species or are a particularly good example of a certain wetland type.
But there's also a sharp critique in the source regarding the 2017 wetland rules in India.
Yes, this is a critical point. The 2017 rules explicitly excluded river channels, paddy fields, and man-made tanks and reservoirs from the legal definition of wetland.
So, A lot of what people would consider a wetland.
A huge amount. The source argues that this single move potentially leaves something like 65% of India's wetlands unprotected by the law.
That is a massive loophole.
Yeah.
On the flip side, though, the source mentions the Amrit Dharohar scheme from the 2023-24 budget.
That is a more positive development. It's a new scheme that focuses on empowering local communities to be stewards of their local wetlands. It promotes conservation, but also things like ecotourism and using the wetlands for carbon storage. It's a more holistic approach.
Okay. Moving from the spongy wetlands, let's talk about estuaries, the mixing bowl.
An estuary is where the river meets the sea. It's a semi-enclosed body of water that has a free connection to the open ocean, but where seawater is also measurably diluted with fresh water draining from the land.
So the conditions there must be wild. They must change constantly.
Extremely variable. The salinity can range from almost 0 ppO near the river mouth to 35 pt near the ocean entrance, and it changes with the tides.
The source calls them a nutrient trap. What does that mean?
It means that the slowing river water drops its load of sediment and nutrients when it meets the tidal action of the sea. They catch all that mud and sand, which is how you get deltas,
And they get nutrients from both sides.
from both the river and the sea. This makes them one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, and because they're sheltered, there is little wave action, making them a calm refuge and nursery for countless species of fish and birds,
But being a trap means they trap everything.
including pollution, and that's the threat. The sources list the major threats in India as changes in water flow from upstream dams, heavy pollution from cities and industries, dredging for ports, and land reclamation, especially for aquaculture like shrimp farming.
Now, living in these extreme shifting environments like estuaries and brackish zones requires some serious adaptations. And that brings us to the coastal guardians. Let's talk about mangroves.
Mangroves are incredible. They are essentially trees of the tide. They are a group of trees and shrubs that live in the coastal intertidal zone.
But most plants hate salt water. It kills them. How do mangroves survive?
They have a whole toolkit of amazing adaptations. First, to deal with the waterlogged, oxygen-poor mud, they have pneumatophores.
What are those?
They are blind roots or breathing roots. They are special roots that grow upwards, sticking up out of the mud to take in oxygen directly from the air.
Like little snorkels for the root system.
Exactly. And then there's the reproduction method, which is my favorite part. It's called viviparity.
Viviparity, live birth.
It's brilliant. The seeds actually germinate while still in the parent tree. They grow into a seedling called a propagule before falling off.
So they don't drown in the salt water or get washed away.
They are born ready to root. They fall like a dart, stick in the mud, and start growing immediately.
And these forests aren't just cool to look at. They are a literal shield for the coastline. The source specifically mentions the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami.
That was a huge wake-up call for many countries. Areas that were fronted by healthy mangrove forests suffered significantly less damage and loss of life than areas where the mangroves had been cleared. They act as a powerful buffer against tsunamis, cyclones, and everyday soil erosion.
So let's look at the mangrove profile in India. The Sundarbans are the big one, obviously.
The Sundarbans in West Bengal are the largest single block of tidal halophytic mangroves in the entire world. A UNESCO World Heritage Site and, of course, home to the Royal Bengal tiger.
But there are other important areas.
Yes, Bhitarkanika in Odisha is known for its high genetic diversity of mangroves. Gujarat has seen improving conditions in the Kori Creek area, but then you have places like Pichavaram in Tamil Nadu, which have been heavily degraded, largely due to the expansion of aquaculture.
Are there initiatives to fix this?
There are. The source mentions the MENU-STI scheme that stands for Mangrove Initiative for Shoreline Habitats and Tangible Incomes. It's a new program that plans to use funds from government employment schemes like MGNRE-GA for mangrove plantation drives along the coast.
Okay, so let's move from the muddy, protective mangroves to the colorful, fragile world of coral reefs, the rainforests of the ocean.
A very apt description. They have incredible biodiversity. But what's fascinating is that they are built on a biological marvel of cooperation. A coral is not a plant, it's an animal.
A colony of tiny animals called polyps.
Right. And these polyps live in a symbiotic relationship with microscopic algae called zooplankton that live inside their tissues.
A perfect symbiosis. It's a deal.
It is. The polyp, the animal, provides a protected home and compounds the algae need for photosynthesis, like CO2. In return, the algae photosynthesizes and gives the coral food in the form of carbon compounds. It also gives the coral its vibrant color.
And the physical reef structure, the part we see, is basically built on skeletons.
Exactly. As the polyps die, they leave behind their hard limestone skeletons. New polyps build on top of them. Over thousands of years, this creates the massive structures we know as coral reefs.
The source mentions the different types found in India. There are fringing reefs, which hug the shore, like in the Andamans.
Then barrier reefs, which run parallel to the shore but are separated by a lagoon. You see those in the Nicobar and Lakshadweep Islands.
And atolls, which are the circular reefs enclosing a central lagoon, which is what the Lakshadweep Islands are famous for.
Right.
But we can't talk about corals today without talking about the crisis they're facing. Bleaching.
Bleaching is the single greatest threat to coral reefs globally, and it happens when that symbiotic relationship breaks down.
So under stress, and the main stress is heat, right?
Heat is the big one. When the water gets too warm for too long, the coral gets stressed, and it expels the algae, the zooxanthellae, living in its tissues.
And since the algae gives the coral its color,
The coral turns bone white. You're seeing the transparent polyp tissue over the white limestone skeleton. That's bleaching.
when a coral is bleached, is it dead?
Not yet, and this is a really important point. It's not death, but it's on life support. The coral is still alive, but it has lost its primary food source and is essentially starving.
So it can recover.
It can. If the water temperature drops and the stress subsides, the coral can regain its algae and survive. But if the bleaching is severe or prolonged, the coral will starve and die.
The source lists the causes. Temperature is number one, but also high solar radiance, so too much sunlight.
Right. Freshwater dilution from big storms and chemical contaminants, which they call xenobiotics.
And here is a surprising fact from the text that I did not know. We always think of corals as tropical, but there are cold water corals.
Yes, and there are actually more of them. They exist in deep, dark, cold water, for example, off the coast of Norway. They don't have the symbiotic algae, so they aren't colorful, but they form massive reef structures that are just as important for biodiversity.
That is wild. Okay, so we've surveyed the beauty and the damage. Now let's talk about the rules. How are we trying to manage and protect all of this? This brings us to the Coastal Regulation Zone, or CRZ, notification.
This is the core legal framework in India to balance development and conservation along the coast. It classifies the coastal area into different zones.
So let's break down the zoning. CRZ-I.
CRZI is the most sensitive. It's divided into IA and IB. This includes ecologically sensitive areas like mangroves, coral reefs, salt marshes, turtle nesting grounds. Generally, no new construction is allowed here, with very rare exceptions for things like projects from the Department of Atomic Energy.
Okay, so that's the no-go zone. What's CRZ-2?
CRZ2 is the area that is already developed up to the shoreline. These are basically the built-up urban areas within coastal municipalities. Development is allowed here, but within certain norms.
And CRZ-3.
This is the rural and relatively undisturbed areas. Now, the 2018 notification made a key distinction here. For densely populated rural areas, the No Development Zone, or NDZ, was reduced to 50 meters from the high tide line. For less dense areas, it remained at 200 meters.
That sounds like a controversial change.
It was. Critics argued it would open up more of the coastline to development.
Then finally, CRZ-I.
CRZV is the aquatic area itself. The water area from the low tide line out to 12 nautical miles. It regulates activities like fishing and other uses of the water body.
Beyond just zoning, the source also mentions Blue Flag certification.
Yes, this is an international eco-label. It's like the gold standard for beaches. A beach has to meet 33 stringent criteria related to water quality, safety, environmental management, and education.
And India has a few of these.
It does. The source mentions Kapad in Kerala and Golden Beach in Odisha.
Oh.
It's part of a broader program called BEAMS, which stands for Beach Environment and Aesthetics Management Services, aimed at upgrading Indian beaches to international standards.
Finally, we have to talk about probably the most complex and culturally significant aquatic system in India, the Ganga River.
The Ganga is a case study in itself. The efforts to clean it go way back. The source mentions the Ganga Action Plan, which started in 1986.
A very early attempt.
Yes, and more recently, the flagship program has been the Namami Gange mission. It's an integrated mission with a huge budget, focusing on two key things: Nirmal Dhara, which means clean flow, and Aviral Dhara, which means continuous, uninterrupted flow.
So stopping pollution and ensuring the river actually has enough water.
Right. But the really interesting recent shift mentioned in the text is the new model called Arthganga.
Arth meaning economy, so economy of the Congo.
Exactly. The idea is to link conservation with economic activity for the people living along the river.
What does that look like in practice?
A few things. Promoting zero-budget natural farming, so chemical-free farming, in a 10-kilometer belt along the riverbanks to reduce fertilizer runoff.
Okay.
Using the Go Barden scheme to turn cow dung into biofertilizer. Monetizing the byproducts of sewage treatment selling treated wastewater for irrigation and sludge as fertilizer.
So turning a liability into an asset.
Precisely. And also developing tourism things like boat tourism, yoga events, and upgrading the ghats, the steps leading down to the river. It's a whole economic model built around a clean river.
And the source also mentions the Clean Ganga Fund.
Yes, which invites voluntary contributions from individuals, companies, even NRIs, non-resident Indians with tax benefits, to create a dedicated pool of money for these projects. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach.
So we have traveled an incredible distance today, from the microscopic plankton that forms the base of the food web
To the massive mangrove forests that guard our coasts and the intricate policies that try to govern them.
What really stands out to me after all this is just how interconnected every single piece is. A decision about fertilizer used hundreds of miles inland.
Can create a dead zone in the ocean, a decision to clear a small patch of mangroves.
Can leave a village vulnerable to a cyclone. It's all one system.
That is the essence of ecology. The environment isn't just nature out there, it's a system of checks, balances, and flows. Flows of energy, nutrients, water. And policies like the CRZ and missions like Namami Gange are our sort of clumsy human attempts to maintain or restore those balances.
I want to leave you with a final thought today, something to reflect on. We talked about winter kill in a lake, how a perfectly healthy ecosystem can die silently under the ice, and you don't even know it's happened until the spring melt.
Nature has tipping points. Coral bleaching is another one. It looks fine one day, and then suddenly it's white. The damage happens invisibly before the symptoms are obvious.
Right. And the sources we look at today show this really interesting shift in our approach. We've moved from just conserving nature, putting a fence around it,
actively managing it, and now, with things like Arthganga, trying to monetize its health.
Exactly. And that's the question to mull over. In our modern world, is that economic integration, making a healthy environment profitable, the only way to truly save these ecosystems? Or is that a dangerous path to walk? Something to think about. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
At this stage, it is important to understand the ecological relationship involved.
That is quite the opening line. It sounds like something straight out of a textbook, doesn't it?
It does, but it's the perfect, if a little dense, starting point. Because what we're really talking about today is a domino effect, a hidden chain reaction.
Exactly. We're talking about how one seemingly small action, something you might not even notice, can, ripple outwards and cause a complete ecological collapse.
Right, and to give everyone a frame of reference here, we aren't starting with the big picture of global climate change just yet. We're zooming way in, down to the water level. We're looking at what happens when you dump hot water into a river or a lake.
That's the topic, thermal pollution.
Wow.
And it's a fascinatingly subtle kind of pollution. It's not like an oil slick or a plume of toxic chemicals.
Oh, the water can look perfectly clean.
Perfectly clean, perfectly clear. You have these massive power plants, nuclear facilities, factories. They need to cool their machinery, so they suck in huge volumes of river water, run it through their systems, and then spit it back out. The only difference is it's hot, and that heat, that's the poison.
And the actual mechanism here, it's basically high school chemistry, but the fallout is just immense. The core principle our sources highlight is that warm water physically holds less dissolved oxygen than cold water.
That's it. That's the entire linchpin of the problem. For the technically minded, it's governed by something called Henry's Law. It states that the warmer a liquid gets, the less gas it can keep dissolved within it. The oxygen literally bubbles out. It escapes into the atmosphere.
So the water itself is suffocating, in a way. It can't hold its breath for the creatures living in it.
It can't. But here's where it gets really cruel. There's this twist that the sources call a metabolic paradox, and this is the part that I think is it's a stunning piece of biological irony.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Right. So you have your fish, your crabs, all the aquatic life. They are what we call poikilothermic, or cold-blooded. Their body temperature is dictated entirely by the water around them.
They don't have their own internal thermostat like we do.
Not at all. So when the water gets warmer, their bodies get warmer. And when their bodies get warmer, their metabolism it goes into overdrive. There is a rule of thumb, the Q10 temperature coefficient, that says for roughly every 10 degrees Celsius rise, their metabolic rate doubles.
Doubles. So their bodies are suddenly working twice as hard.
Twice as hard. Their internal engines are screaming for more fuel, more energy. They get hungrier. They need to move more.
But to burn all that fuel, to power that high-speed metabolism, they need more oxygen, don't they?
A lot more oxygen. Their demand for it skyrockets.
Yeah.
And that's the paradox. That's the trap.
Wow.
Just at the moment, their bodies are desperate for more oxygen than ever. The physical environment, the water itself, has had its oxygen supply slashed in half.
So you're making them hungrier and more desperate for air in a room with no food and no air.
It's like forcing an athlete to sprint a marathon while putting a plastic bag over their head. It's a guaranteed failure.
That's an incredible image. But it doesn't even stop there, does it? The heat messes with the food supply, too.
It gets worse, yes. The heat changes the entire foundation of the food web. In healthy, cool water, you get a lot of diatoms and green algae. Think of it as the nutritious salad bar of the river.
The good stuff.
The good stuff. But as the temperature rises and oxygen drops, those species die off. And they're replaced by less desirable, often toxic, blue-green algae or cyanobacteria.
So not only are the fish suffocating and starving, but their salad bar just got replaced with something that might poison them.
You've got it. It's a complete system collapse, and we haven't even touched on thermal shock.
Right. This is the immediate damage. Not the slow suffocation, but the instant impact.
Yeah, if the temperature change is too sudden, even by just 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, it can be instantly fatal. The source material gets pretty technical here. It talks about the coagulation of cell proteins and altering enzyme metabolism.
Coagulation of proteins. That sounds an awful lot like cooking.
That is a perfect analogy. It's exactly what happens when you fry an egg. The clear, liquidy part turns white and solid. That's protein coagulation. Now imagine that happening to the delicate enzymes inside a fish's cells.
They just stop working. The fish's internal machinery breaks down.
It breaks down at a molecular level. The animal's being cooked from the inside out.
Which brings us back to that idea of invisible pollution. The water looks fine, but it's a biological wasteland.
And that's the perfect pivot for this whole deep dive, isn't it? We're tracing these invisible lines, this web of consequences. We started with heat in the water, but we're going to explore how we measure this death, how these problems jump from the water to the air, how they're impacting fragile places like the Himalayas, and, believe it or not, how they connect all the way down to the bees in your backyard.
It's a massive, interconnected story. So let's make that pivot official. We've talked about the cause, the heat. How do we measure the effect? How do we take a river's pulse and know that it's sick?
We need metrics. And in hydrology, there are 3 key acronyms that are like the vital signs on a hospital monitor: DO, BOD, and CO.
Okay, let's break those down. We've already touched on DO, which is dissolved oxygen.
Right, that's the absolute baseline. It's the amount of oxygen available for life. And the benchmarks our sources give are pretty stark. Water with a DO level below 8.0 milligrams per liter is considered contaminated.
8 is the warning sign.
It's the yellow light. But if it drops below 4.0 milligrams per liter, that's a 5-alarm fire. That's considered highly polluted. At that point, your sensitive species, your trout, your salmon, they can't survive. They literally asphyxiate.
Okay, so a low DO is a very bad sign. What about the next one? BOD, biological oxygen demand. I like to think of this one as a measure of how much cleanup work there is to do.
That's a great way to put it. Imagine you have organic pollution in the water, sewage, agricultural runoff, things like that.
The stuff bacteria like to eat.
Exactly. The bacteria are the janitors. They get to work breaking down all that waste. But that work, that decomposition, it requires energy. And for them, that means consuming oxygen.
So if there's a huge amount of sewage, the bacteria go on a feeding frenzy and use up all the available oxygen to do it.
Precisely. The biological oxygen demand is the measure of how much oxygen those bacteria will demand to clean up the mess. So a high BOD means there's a lot of pollution, which means the bacteria are going to consume a lot of oxygen, leaving very little for the fish.
So high BOD means low DO. They have an inverse relationship.
A perfect inverse relationship.
Yeah.
And then you have the third one, COD, or chemical oxygen demand.
Okay, how is this different from BOD? It sounds similar.
It is, but with a crucial distinction. Bacteria, the workers in the BOD test, they're picky eaters. They only consume biodegradable waste.
Okay.
They won't touch industrial chemicals, pesticides, plastics. So you could have a river that's crystal clear, but laced with toxic industrial effluent. The BOD might be low because the bacteria can't eat the poison, but the river is still incredibly sick.
So BOD can miss some of the worst kinds of pollution.
It can. SNOD is a much tougher test. Instead of using bacteria, in the lab we use a powerful chemical oxidizing agent to break down everything, the biodegradable stuff and the non-biodegradable stuff. It measures the total pollution load.
It's the brute force measurement.
It is. So your SOD value will almost always be higher than your BOD value. And if there's a really big gap between the two, it's a huge red flag that you're dealing with industrial, not organic pollution.
Okay, those are the numbers, the lab tests.
Yeah.
But what if you're just, out for a walk by a stream? Our sources talk about biological indicators, which is like nature's own alarm system.
Yes. And this is where a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. Most people think, oh, look, there's life in the water. I see worms. It must be healthy.
But it's about seeing the right kind of life, isn't it?
It's all about that. Some species are incredibly tough. They don't just tolerate pollution, they thrive in it. The classic example the text gives is the tubifex worm.
Also known as the sludge worm.
A very fitting name. These little red worms are specialists in surviving in low oxygen muck. Their hemoglobin is super efficient at grabbing any stray molecule of oxygen it can find.
So they can breathe where other animals would suffocate.
Instantly. So if you look into the mud of a stream bed and see it teeming with these wriggling red worms, but you don't see any mayfly larvae, no snails, no clams, that's not a sign of life.
It's a sign of death.
It's the sign of a graveyard. You're seeing the only things that could survive the apocalypse. The sensitive species, the plankton, the mollusks, the fish, they're already long gone.
This is all incredibly sobering, and we're just talking about the worms and the fish. But this pollution doesn't stay in the river. It inevitably finds its way to us, whether it's through our drinking water or the food we eat from that water. And this next section in our sources, it reads like a public health nightmare.
It really does. We tend to think of waterborne illnesses, getting a stomach bug from dirty water, cholera, typhoid. But the chemical pollutants, they cause these very specific, very terrifying diseases.
The one that always stands out, the one everyone learns about, is Minamata disease.
Japan, 1952. It's the quintessential story of corporate negligence. A factory was dumping its industrial wastewater, which contained methylmercury, directly into Minamata Bay.
And the methyl part of methylmercury is important here, right? It's not just mercury.
It's absolutely crucial. Inorganic mercury is bad. Methylmercury in organic form is far, far worse because it gets absorbed into living tissue. It enters the food chain.
It bioaccumulates.
Yes. It starts in the plankton. Then the small fish eat the plankton, bigger fish eat the small fish, and at every step up the food chain, the concentration of methylmercury gets higher and higher.
Until it reaches the people eating the fish from the bay.
And by then, the dose is catastrophic. It's a neurotoxin. The symptoms described are just horrific. Numbness in the limbs, loss of hearing, blurred vision, and, as the source grimly puts it, mental derangement. It literally destroys the brain.
And it had a name in Japan, too, another one. Itai disease.
Itai translates to ouch, ouch.
Just horribly descriptive.
It was caused by cadmium poisoning from mining operations. Cadmium gets into the body and displaces calcium in the bone.
It kicks the calcium out.
Essentially, yes. It leads to a condition called osteomalacia, a severe softening of the bones. They become incredibly brittle and painful. The source says the pain was so excruciating, a simple cough could fracture someone's ribs. The disease was named for the victim's constant cries of pain.
And these are heavy metals from industry. But the danger isn't just from factories. Even something we think of as good for the land, like fertilizer, can be deadly.
You're talking about blue baby syndrome.
Exactly. The technical name is methemoglobinemia.
That's the one. It happens when high levels of nitrates, usually from fertilizer runoff, get into drinking water wells. When a baby, an infant, drinks this water, their digestive system converts the nitrates into nitrites.
And the nitrites are the problem.
The nitrites are the villain. They attack hemoglobin, the molecule in our red blood cells responsible for carrying oxygen.
The oxygen delivery truck.
The delivery truck, yes. The nitrate effectively breaks the truck. It changes hemoglobin into something called methemoglobin, which cannot bind to oxygen.
So the baby's blood is circulating, but it's not delivering any oxygen.
They suffocate from the inside. Their skin turns a characteristic blue-gray color. It's a terrible and entirely preventable condition.
It really hammers home that this is a public health crisis, not just an environmental issue. And the sources list two more that are huge problems, particularly in regions of India: arsenic and fluoride.
Yes. With fluoride, we usually think of it as a good thing for our teeth.
Right, they add it to toothpaste.
In tiny, controlled amounts. But in large concentrations, which can occur naturally in the groundwater in some areas, it causes fluorosis. It attacks the skeleton, causing stiff joints, bone deformities, a condition called knock-knees. It's crippling.
And arsenic contamination in the Ganges Delta region that causes something called Blackfoot disease.
Yes. It's another groundwater contaminant. It damages the blood vessels, particularly in the legs and feet, leading to gangrene. The tissue dies and turns black. It's as awful as it sounds.
Okay. I think we've established just how foundational clean water is and how terrifying the consequences are when it's gone. Let's move from the water up into the air. Let's talk about smog.
From the rivers to the sky.
The word smog is so common now, but I was surprised to learn it's actually a portmanteau, combination of two words.
It is. Coined back in 1905 by Dr. Deveau, it's simply smoke plus fog, smog.
A very literal description.
Yeah.
But the chemistry has gotten a lot more complicated since 1905, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We now draw a major distinction between two types, the classic London smog and the more modern Los Angeles or photochemical smog.
London smog is the original recipe then, the smoke and fog one.
Exactly. That's what you get in a cool, damp industrial city burning a lot of high sulfur coal. It's a thick, soupy mix of soot particles, sulfur dioxide, and water vapor. The Great London Smog of 1952 was a public health disaster that killed thousands.
But LA smog is different. It's a summer problem, not a winter one.
Right. For LA smog, the key ingredient is sunlight. That's why it's called photochemical. You take the exhaust from millions of cars, that's your nitrogen oxides or NOx, and your volatile organic compounds or VOCs, and you bake them in strong sunshine.
And the sunlight acts like a chemical reactor.
It triggers a series of reactions that create a whole new batch of nasty pollutants, a secondary soup of oxidants, the most famous of which is ground-level ozone.
And here's another paradox, the ozone paradox. We're always hearing about the hole in the ozone layer, that we need to protect it.
We do, but it's all about location, location, location. The ozone way up in the stratosphere is good ozone. It forms a protective shield that blocks harmful UV radiation. We'd be in serious trouble without it.
But the ozone created down here in the smog.
That's bad ozone. Down here at ground level, it's a toxic pollutant. It's highly reactive, it damages lung tissue, it triggers asthma attacks. It's really nasty stuff to breathe.
So we need it high up, but we're creating it down low where it can hurt us. And the source mentions a really bizarre side effect of heavy smog. Rickets.
Isn't that wild? It's a perfect example of an unforeseen consequence. Rickets is a bone-softening disease caused by a lack of vitamin D.
And we make vitamin D in our skin when it's exposed to sunlight.
Exactly. But if you live in a city with a thick, permanent layer of smog, that smog can block a significant amount of the UV radiation from ever reaching the ground.
So no sun, no vitamin D, and you get a disease you associate with, the 19th century.
It's a chain reaction. Car exhaust leads to weak bones.
Speaking of things falling from the sky that shouldn't, let's talk about acid rain.
Another classic environmental issue, but with some details that I think will surprise people. The basic chemistry is well known. Sulfur dioxide from burning coal and nitrogen oxides from cars get into the atmosphere.
And they mix with water to become sulfuric and nitric acid.
And then it rains down. But, and this is a key point in our sources, it's not always wet.
What do you mean? How can you have dry rain?
It's called wet versus dry deposition. We always picture a corrosive downpour, and that's the wet deposition. But in dry climates, or between rainfalls, those acidic particles can just fall out of the sky as dust or gas.
So they just coat everything, trees, buildings, the ground.
Everything gets a fine coating of acidic dust. And in some ways, that's even worse, because then, when it finally does rain, that first flush of water washes all that accumulated acid into the ecosystem at once.
An acid shock.
A huge acid shock. The sources say that this dry deposition can account for up to half of the total acidity falling on an ecosystem.
Half? That's staggering. And the damage isn't just from the acid itself. There's something called the trigger effect.
This is one of the most important concepts to understand. The acid rain changes the chemistry of the soil. Soil naturally contains heavy metals like aluminum and mercury, but they're usually locked up in a harmless, inert form.
Okay, they're trapped in the dirt.
Right. But when the pH of the soil drops, when it becomes more acidic, it acts like a key. It unlocks those metals from the soil particles.
It sets them free.
It sets them free, and they get washed into the rivers and lakes. So a fish might have been able to tolerate the acidic water, but it can't tolerate the sudden flood of toxic aluminum that the acid rain leached from the surrounding forest floor.
The acid isn't the killer, it's the accomplice. It releases the real murderer.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And it does the same thing to our buildings. The term used is stone leprosy.
That's a vivid phrase.
It's what happens when acid rain hits buildings made of marble or limestone. The acid reacts with the calcium carbonate in the stone and turns it into gypsum. Gypsum is soft and water-soluble. It just crumbles and washes away. It is literally dissolving our cultural heritage, from the Taj Mahal to ancient statues in Europe.
This is a truly global problem, then, affecting every part of our world. But let's bring the focus to a specific and uniquely fragile geography mentioned in the sources, the Indian Himalayan region, the IHR.
The Water Tower of Asia.
Why that name? What makes it so critical?
Because the health of those mountains dictates the health of the entire subcontinent. The Himalayan glaciers and snowpack act as a massive frozen reservoir. Their slow melt feeds the great perennial rivers, the Ganges, the Indus, the Brahmaputra. Billions of people downstream depend on that water for drinking, for agriculture, for life.
But that water tower is now under threat from within. The issue highlighted is rapid, unplanned urbanization.
Yes, the source uses the phrase mindless concretization.
Paving paradise.
Essentially. We're building roads, hotels, and towns in these incredibly fragile ecosystems, often without proper planning. When you cover a mountainside in concrete and asphalt, you're creating an impermeable layer.
So the rainwater can't soak into the ground.
It can't. It just runs off, causing floods and landslides. And you prevent the recharging of the underground aquifers, which feed the local springs that mountain communities have relied on for centuries. The springs are literally drying up.
And all that concrete creates a heat island effect, even in the mountains.
It does. Dark surfaces absorb more heat, buildings trap it, and they can block the natural flow of cool mountain breezes. This creates localized pockets of heat that can accelerate the melting of nearby glaciers and disrupt the local climate.
And with the people comes the trash.
A massive problem. The influx of tourism, which is an economic lifeline, also brings a deluge of solid waste plastic bottles, food wrappers, that often ends up dumped indiscriminately on hillsides and in rivers.
It's a bleak picture. But the sources do point to some signs of hope, some case studies where people are fighting back.
They do, and it shows that change is possible. In the town of Nainital, there was a project called Mission Butterfly.
That's a great name.
It was a community-led initiative to save the town's famous lake, which was choking on waste. They organized a system where local sweepers collected segregated waste from every household for a small fee. It got the whole community involved, schools, hotels, residents, and turned waste management from a problem into a point of civic pride.
And the state of Himachal Pradesh was a real pioneer in tackling plastic pollution.
Decades ahead of most of the world, they passed a law back in 1995 to control non-biodegradable garbage. They started by mandating thicker plastic bags that were easier to collect and recycle, and then in 2009, they implemented a complete ban on plastic bags.
That's incredible foresight.
It shows what can be done with strong political will. But then, for every success story, you have a counterexample like Dal Lake in Kashmir.
Which is facing a very different kind of pressure.
A crushing amount of it. The sources say around 60,000 people live on or in the lake on houseboats in settlements along the shore. The sheer anthropogenic load from sewage and waste is overwhelming the lake's ability to cleanse itself. It's shrinking and silting up at an alarming rate.
This really highlights the central conflict of tourism, doesn't it? The friction between what the sources call commercial tourism and ecotourism.
It's the core dilemma. Is the goal just to pack as many people as possible into places like Shimla, leading to traffic jams and water shortages? Or is it to create a sustainable model, like what Sikkim is trying to do with regulated low-impact tourism?
The example from Ladakh with the Himalayan homestays is particularly inspiring.
I love that one. It completely changes the economic equation for wildlife. Historically, if a snow leopard killed one of a farmer's goats, the snow leopard was an enemy, a pest to be killed.
Understandably so.
Of course. But the homestay program brings tourists who will pay good money for the chance to even glimpse a snow leopard. They stay in local homes, and the money goes directly to the community.
Suddenly, the snow leopard is worth more alive than dead.
It becomes an asset. The community has a direct financial incentive to protect the predator and its habitat. It aligns conservation with economic self-interest, which is the holy grail of this kind of work.
From a very visible resource like a snow leopard to one that is almost completely invisible. Let's dig into another form of resource extraction that is having a devastating impact. Sand mining.
This might be one of the biggest environmental crises you've never heard of. Sand is the second most consumed natural resource on the planet after water.
I think most of us just see it as Dirt. It's on the beach, it's in the desert. It seems infinite.
It feels that way, but it's not. We use it in everything: concrete, glass, electronics. And the illegal mining of sand from riverbeds is causing catastrophic damage. Because sand isn't just ground-up rock, the source makes a key point. Sand holds water.
It acts like a sponge.
A giant natural sponge. It keeps the riverbed moist, it regulates the flow, and most importantly, it maintains the level of the groundwater table for the surrounding land. When you dredge out all that sand with massive suction pumps,
You're removing the sponge.
the water just rushes through. The river can dry up completely in the non-monsoon months. The source cites the Bhartha River in Kerala as a tragic example, where a once mighty river is now a ghost of its former self, all because its sand was stolen.
And it literally undermines our infrastructure. Bridges collapsing, dams being damaged.
Absolutely. The sand and gravel act as a buffer, slowing the river's flow. You take it away, the water speeds up, becomes more erosive. It scours away the riverbed from around the foundations of bridge pillars until they just topple over.
Is there an alternative? Do we have to destroy our rivers to build our cities?
We don't. The technology exists. The sources point to M-sand, or manufactured sand. You can take large rocks and crush them into particles with the right properties for construction. We can also use industrial byproducts like fly ash from power plants. The solutions are there.
But the illegal sand mafia is a powerful force.
It's a multi-billion-dollar black market. It's a huge challenge.
From the local riverbed to the global supermarket shelf, let's talk about palm oil.
If sand is the invisible ingredient in our cities, palm oil is the invisible ingredient in our food. It's in about half of all packaged products. Cookies, pizza dough, ice cream, shampoo, lipstick. It's everywhere.
The source says it accounts for a third of the world's entire vegetable oil production.
It's incredibly productive. You get more oil per hectare from oil palms than any other crop, which is why it's so cheap and popular. But that efficiency comes at an apocalyptic environmental price.
And that price is paid by the rainforests of Indonesia and Malaysia.
Borneo and Sumatra, specifically. Vast swaths of some of the most biodiverse rainforests on Earth have been leveled and replaced with sterile monoculture palm plantations.
And the most famous victim of this deforestation is the orangutan.
Our close relative. The numbers are just heartbreaking. The population has plummeted by well over 50% in recent decades. The source gives a figure of the population dropping from over 300,000 to less than 50,000. We are wiping them out.
How does it happen? Is it just that their homes are cut down?
That's the start. Their habitat is fragmented, they can't find food, so they wander onto the plantations, where they're often shot by workers as agricultural pests. It's a direct and brutal conflict.
And here's the uncomfortable connection for many of us. India plays a massive role in driving this.
India is the single largest importer of palm oil in the world. While there is some domestic production, it's a tiny fraction of what the country consumes. The demand from Indian consumers is a major economic driver of that deforestation happening thousands of miles away.
So the choices we make in the supermarket have a direct impact on the survival of an orangutan.
It's a stark example of our interconnected world. A global supply chain of extinction.
From the fate of one of our largest cousins to some of our smallest but most important partners, the bees. This section on colony collapse disorder, or CCD, is deeply unsettling.
It's been called the Mary Celeste phenomenon of the insect world.
The Mary Celeste, that was the ghost ship, found adrift with the crew just gone.
Exactly. And that's what beekeepers started finding. They'd open a hive, and the queen bee would be there. There'd be plenty of honey and pollen stores. The young larvae would be there waiting to be fed. But all the adult worker bees had vanished.
They just didn't come home from work.
They never came back. No pile of dead bees in front of the hive. They just flew off and disappeared.
And the sources say it's not one single cause, but a perfect storm of factors hitting them all at once.
It's a death by 1,000 cuts. First, you have climate change causing what's called a phenological mismatch.
A timing issue.
A critical timing issue. Flowers are blooming earlier because of warmer springs, but the bees might emerge from hibernation at their usual time, and by then, the nectar flow is over, the buffet is closed before they even get there.
Then there's the stress of modern agriculture. I had no idea we truck bees around the country.
It's a massive industry. They load millions of hives onto semi-trucks to pollinate the almond groves in California, then truck them across the country for apples, then blueberries. It's incredibly stressful for the bees. It exposes them to diseases, and it forces them onto a monoculture diet.
And on top of all that, you have the pesticides. specifically neonicotinoids.
The new nicotine-like insecticides, and these are particularly insidious. Unlike older pesticides that were sprayed on top of a plant, neonicotinoids are systemic.
Meaning they're inside the plant itself.
The plant absorbs them through its roots, and the chemical is present in every part of the plant. The leaves, the nectar, the pollen, so the bee can't avoid it.
And it doesn't kill them outright.
No, it's a neurotoxin. It scrambles their ability to navigate. Bees have an incredible internal GPS system. This chemical damages that system. They fly out to find flowers, and then they literally forget the way home.
So they just die out in the fields, lost and alone.
That's what the evidence suggests. And the stakes couldn't be higher. There's a quote in the source, "No more bees, no more man."
Is that hyperbole?
It's dramatic, but it's not far from the truth. About a third of the food we eat depends directly on pollination by bees. Without them, you can say goodbye to apples, almonds, coffee, avocados. Our entire food system would be crippled.
It's another example of a direct conflict between our technology and the natural world, a theme that continues with larger animals and our infrastructure.
Like train collisions with elephants. We've built our railway lines directly across ancient migratory corridors that elephants have used for thousands of years. The result is predictable and tragic.
And then there's the more invisible infrastructure. Mobile phone towers and electromagnetic radiation, EMR.
This is a really contentious area, but the sources point to a couple of potential mechanisms, especially for birds. They have a larger surface area to body weight ratio than we do, and less fluid, so there's a theory they might be more susceptible to the heating effects of the radiation.
But the bigger concern is navigation, right?
That seems to be the primary focus. Many species, including birds and bees, are believed to use the Earth's magnetic fields to navigate. Magnetoreception. The theory is that the powerful EMR from all these towers creates a kind of electromagnetic smog that interferes with their ability to read that natural magnetic map.
We're jamming their internal compass.
That's the concern. We're filling the air with signals that let us talk to each other, but might be making them lose their way.
It feels like we're meddling with things on a fundamental level, which is the perfect entry into the next section, bioethics and the world of genetic engineering, starting with GE trees.
Genetically engineered trees, we're used to the idea of GM crops, like corn or soy. This is the next step.
And the sales pitch is very appealing. Trees that grow much faster, that produce better quality wood, that can sequester more carbon to help fight climate change.
On the surface, it sounds like a perfect solution. And there are big corporate interests, including biofuel companies, pushing this technology hard.
But the potential perils are also much, much bigger than with an annual crop like corn.
Infinitely bigger. A corn plant lives for a few months. A tree can live for hundreds of years. We have no way of knowing how a genetic modification will behave over that kind of timescale. But the biggest fear is containment. Pollen. Tree pollen is designed by nature to travel huge distances. The source says it can travel up to 600 kilometers.
600 kilometers. You can't put a fence around that.
You absolutely cannot. So if you plant a plantation of GE trees, their pollen is guaranteed to drift into native wild forests. You risk contaminating the natural gene pool, potentially creating invasive super trees that could outcompete native species. It's a biological genie you can never put back in the bottle.
And the text mentions there's already an experiment with GE rubber happening in India.
Yes, in Kerala, which has ironically declared itself a GM-free state. So there's a lot of local opposition and concern. People are worried about things like GM honey if bees forage on the flowers of these GM rubber trees.
So while we're pushing the boundaries of creating new life, there's one story in here of a remarkable ethical stand to protect existing life. The dolphins.
This is a truly wonderful and progressive story. India's Ministry of Environment and Forests officially banned the keeping of dolphins in captivity.
So no dolphin shows, no dolphinariums.
None, but it's the reasoning behind the ban that is so profound. The government's circular didn't just talk about animal welfare. It officially declared dolphins to be non-human persons.
Non-human persons. That phrase is powerful.
It's a paradigm shift. It's a formal recognition of their high intelligence, their complex social lives, their self-awareness. It makes the argument that to confine such a being to a small, concrete peg for human entertainment is ethically indefensible.
It's a rare case of ethics winning out over potential tourism dollars.
A very rare and commendable case. Proposals for dolphin parks across the country were rejected based on this ethical principle. It reframes our relationship with other intelligent species from one of ownership to one of respect.
So we have all these complex problems from thermal plumes to GE trees. how does society even attempt to regulate all this? This brings us to the EIA.
The Environmental Impact Assessment. It sounds dry and bureaucratic, but in theory, it is our most important regulatory shield.
What's the core idea behind it?
It's a look before you leap law. Before a company can get permission to build a new mine, dam, or factory, they are required to conduct a thorough study to predict all the potential negative impacts on the environment and on local communities.
And a key part of that process is the public hearing.
The public hearing is, or should be, the democratic heart of the EIA. It's the chance for the people who will actually be affected, the farmers whose water might be polluted, the tribal communities whose forests might be cut down, to have their voices heard.
But our sources are quite critical of how the EIA process works in reality.
It's deeply flawed. The reports themselves are often very poor quality, what's known as cut-and-paste jobs, where consultants literally copy sections from other reports and just change the name of the project.
You can't be serious.
It happens all the time. Another huge flaw is that the data collection is often done for only one season, which is useless. An ecosystem changes dramatically between the dry season and the monsoon. To get a true picture, you need at least a year of data.
But the developers want to move fast.
And the system often lets them. And the proposed changes in the 2020 draft notification that the source mentions seem designed to weaken the process even further.
What were the main concerns with that draft?
Two big ones. It proposed cutting the time given to the public to review the documents from 30 days to just 20. That's not enough time for a rural community to understand a dense technical report. And it also proposed exempting a whole list of projects from public hearings altogether.
Making it easier to push projects through without public scrutiny.
That was the fear. A push for ease of doing business that could come at the cost of the environment and public health.
So after this whole journey, where do we land? We have covered a huge amount of ground.
We really have. We started with the simple physics of hot water in a river, and we've ended up in the weeds of legal and regulatory policy.
It really illustrates the web of consequences we set out to explore.
It does. It shows that pollution isn't just a barrel of sludge, it's heat, it's invisible radiation, it's bad urban planning, it's the pollen from a tree you can't see.
And it's all connected. The demand for cheap snacks in one country drives deforestation in another. Paving a road in the mountains dries up a spring a mile away.
But we also saw that choices and policies can make a difference. The plastic ban in Himachal, the moral stand on dolphins, the development of alternatives like M-sand. There is agency here.
So to wrap this all up, what's the final provocative thought you want to leave everyone with today?
I want to leave you with a concept mentioned in our sources from the World Bank. They calculate something called the cost of environmental degradation. And their estimate for India is that this cost is equivalent to 5.7% of the country's GDP every year.
5.7%. That's an enormous number.
It's a staggering number, but let's think about what it really means. When you or I buy a product, a bag of chips with palm oil, a brick made with river sand, we pay a price. But that price is a lie.
A lie. How so?
Because it doesn't include the externalities. It doesn't include the cost of the destroyed rainforest, the cost of the collapsed bridge, the future medical bills for the child with respiratory illness from smog, the lost income from the dried up spring. We are paying that price later with our health, our taxes, and our children's future.
The true cost is hidden.
It's hidden. So the question I want to leave you with is this. What if it wasn't? What if the price tag on that bag of chips truly reflected the cost of the lost orangutan habitat? If the cost of that sand included the cost of a new bridge, would we still think it was cheap? And would we still be able to afford it?
A question that changes how you look at everything on the shelf. Thank you for this incredibly detailed deep dive.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
At this stage, it is important to understand the ecological relationship involved.
It really is. It's fundamental. Because if you don't grasp that relationship, you miss everything. You miss the entire architecture of how life works.
Right. We tend to see nature as a collection of things, don't we? Like exhibits in a museum.
Exactly. Here's a tree, there's a bird, over there's a fish. But that relationship you just mentioned, that's the invisible wiring. It's the thing that connects, say, a microscopic bacterium in the soil to a blue whale migrating across an entire ocean.
And back to us.
And right back to the air you and I are breathing in this very studio. It all connects.
That is a heavy way to start today, but I am absolutely here for it. Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a word that I think for most of us sits in the boring textbook definition part of our brain, and we're going to try and bring it to life.
We're talking about biodiversity.
We are. And before you tune out, because it sounds like a buzzword from a corporate pamphlet, please stick with us. Because this is not just about counting how many types of beetles there are. This is about the engine that keeps the entire planet running.
It is the engine. And it's the fuel and the mechanic all kind of rolled into one. When we talk about biodiversity, we're looking at the result of 4 billion years of evolution.
4 billion, it's a number that you can't really get your head around it.
You can't. It's almost impossible for the human brain to truly comprehend that time scale. But it's 4 billion years of trial and error, of genetic mutation, survival, death, adaptation. Every single living thing you see outside your window right now, it's a winner. A winner in the longest, most brutal lottery in the history of the universe.
So we're not just talking about a list of animals. I think that's the common mistake, right? We think, oh, the rainforest is diverse because it has lots of colorful frogs. But it goes so much deeper than that.
Much, much deeper. The actual definition of biodiversity isn't just lots of animals. It's the variability among living organisms from all sources. So that's terrestrial, land, marine, the oceans, and other aquatic ecosystems.
All of it.
All of it. And crucially, it covers 3 distinct tiers. If you're only looking at the number of species, you're missing 2/3 of the picture.
Okay, let's break those tiers down. This was the first kind of aha moment for me during the research. We usually jump straight to tier 2, which is the species. But tier 1 is invisible, genetic diversity.
It's the absolute foundation. Genetic diversity is the variation of genes within a single species. It's the reason why, if you look at a crowd of people, no 2 faces are identical, unless they're identical twins, of course.
But it's not just about looks.
Oh, not at all. It goes way beyond aesthetics. It's about survival capability. It's about resilience.
Right, and this is where I want to push on the why. Why does it matter if a population of, rice or frogs or even us has different genes? Wouldn't it be more efficient if we all just had the best possible genes?
Efficient for a moment, maybe, but incredibly dangerous in the long run. Think about the banana you buy at the grocery store.
The Cavendish banana.
That Cavendish. They are, for all intents and purposes, clones. They're genetically identical. Now, because there is practically 0 genetic diversity, if a fungus evolves that can kill 1 Cavendish banana,
It can kill all of them.
it can kill every Cavendish banana on the planet. There's no genetic variant that might happen to be resistant. There's no backup plan. Genetic diversity is nature's insurance policy. It guarantees that when the environment changes, and it always changes, when a new disease appears or the climate shifts, there's enough variation in the gene pool that at least some individuals will have the right code to survive.
That is both terrifying and really illuminating. It's like investing, isn't it? You don't put all your money into one stock no matter how good it looks. You diversify so a single crash doesn't wipe you out.
That's a perfect analogy. And to show you just how powerful this genetic coding is, just look at us and our closest relatives. We like to think of humans as this completely separate, unique thing.
We do. We put ourselves on a pedestal.
But if you actually look at the genetic map, the difference between a human being and a chimpanzee is only about 1.6%.
1.7%. That's less than the margin of error on a math test.
It's tiny. We are 98.4% identical to chimps. And yet that tiny 1.6% variance accounts for Shakespeare, for space travel, for nuclear physics, for this very conversation we're having. It just shows that these tiny shifts in genetic diversity can lead to absolutely monumental differences in outcome.
Okay, so that's the micro level. Tier 1, the genes. So tier 2 is the one we're all familiar with, species diversity.
Right, this is the count. But even here, we need to be precise with our language. A species is defined as a group of organisms that are genetically distinct and, this is the critical part, do not interbreed in nature to produce fertile offspring.
Okay, so the classic example is a horse and a donkey.
Exactly. A horse and a donkey can mate, but they produce a mule. And a mule is sterile. It can't have its own babies. Therefore, horses and donkeys are different species. So species diversity is just the variety of these distinct groups on Earth.
And then we zoom all the way out. Tier 3, ecosystem diversity.
This is the landscape level. It's the variety of habitats. You've got coral reefs, deserts, grasslands, tropical rainforests, mangroves, tundra, you name it.
The big picture.
The biggest picture. Each one of these is a distinct system, and it's dictated by things like climate, geography, and what kind of vegetation can grow there. And here's the connection back to Tier 2. The diversity of the ecosystem is what dictates the diversity of the species.
You won't find a polar bear in the Sahara.
And you won't find a camel on an iceberg. The habitat sets the stage. It defines which players can even show up to the game.
So you have the genes, the players, and the stage. Genetic, species, ecosystem.
Okay, but here's the problem I always run into when reading about this. Scientists love to say things like, this area is diverse, or this area is not. But how do you actually measure that? You can't just walk into a forest and feel the diversity. You need numbers, you need data. How do we measure what feels immeasurable?
That is a massive, massive challenge. But ecologists have developed a framework to try and turn that beautiful chaos into cold, hard numbers. We don't just, count heads. We look at two main metrics to start: species richness and species evenness.
Richness sounds pretty straightforward. That's just the total number, right? I went bird watching and I saw 50 types of birds.
Correct. Species richness is the sheer count, the total number of different species in a given area. But richness on its own can be really deceiving.
How so?
Okay, imagine you have two forests. Let's call them Forest A and Forest B. Forest A has 100 trees, and those 100 trees represent 10 different species.
Forest B also has 100 trees and also represents 10 different species, so their species richness is identical.
Right. So on paper, you'd say they're equally diverse.
On paper, yes, but now let's look closer. In Forest A, you have 10 oak trees, 10 maples, 10 pines, 10 birch, and so on. A nice, even distribution.
Got it.
In Forest B, you have 91 oak trees, and then just one single tree of each of the other 9 species. Now, which forest is actually more diverse?
Well, Forest A, clearly. Forest B is basically just an oak plantation with a few, accidental tourists who wandered in.
Precisely. And that second metric is called species evenness. It measures the proportion of species at a site. Low evenness means 1 or 2 species just dominate everything. High evenness means the population is well distributed. To have a truly healthy, robust, diverse ecosystem, you need both. You need high richness and high evenness.
That distinction completely changes how I look at a landscape now. You can drive past a huge green field and think, oh, look, nature. But if it's just one type of grass, the evenness is terrible.
It's a monoculture. And ecologically speaking, a monoculture is incredibly fragile. It's like that banana problem all over again.
Okay, so once we have those numbers, richness and evenness, we can start applying them at different scales. I saw scientists talk about alpha, beta, and gamma diversity.
Which sounds like a fraternity, I know.
It does. But I'm guessing it's more like a way of zooming the camera lens in and out.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. Alpha diversity is the macro lens. It's the diversity within a particular single ecosystem. So how many species are in this specific patch of forest? That's alpha.
Okay, so alpha is my backyard.
Yes, or a single pond. Then you have beta diversity. This is when you pan the camera. It's a comparison between 2 different ecosystems. It measures the change, or the turnover, in species from one habitat to the next.
So if I walk from my backyard forest down to the riverbank.
Right. And if the species you see in the forest, the birds, the insects, the plants, are completely different from the ones you see at the river, you have high beta diversity.
Because the entire cast of characters has changed.
Exactly. But if you walked from your forest into a slightly less dense forest and saw mostly the same birds and bugs, your beta diversity would be low. It's a measure of uniqueness between sites.
And gamma.
Gamma diversity is the wide-angle lens, the drone shot. It's the overall total diversity for the entire region. The forest, the river, the mountain, the fields, all of it combined.
So alpha's the yard, beta is the difference between the yard and the river, and gamma is the whole county.
You've absolutely got it. That's the framework.
Okay, so we can count them, we can analyze their genes, we can map them across landscapes. But now I have to play devil's advocate for a second. There is definitely a listener out there right now stuck in traffic, trying to get to a job they might not love, thinking, okay, that's cool. There are lots of different bugs in the Amazon, but why does that matter to me? Why should I care about beta diversity when I have a mortgage to pay?
It's the so what question. And frankly, it's the only question that matters if we want to make any real change. We have to stop viewing nature as a luxury item.
Like something to visit on the weekend.
Exactly, or something to watch in a documentary. The reality is we are all on life support, and biodiversity is the machine that's keeping us alive. The term we use for this is ecosystem services.
It sounds a little, a bit cold, like we're treating Mother Nature as a utility company.
In a cold economic sense, she is the ultimate utility company, and the services are provided for free. Think about it. First, you have the big ones, the ecosystem services. This is the heavy lifting. Forests and oceans regulate the global climate. Wetlands filter pollutants out of our water for free, a job that would cost us billions and billions to do with technology.
We don't invent soil either, we just use it.
We just use it. Usually we deplete it.
Yeah.
That soil formation is a service. Then you have biological services. This is the direct stuff. The food we eat, the medicines we derive from plants, the timber for our houses, the breeding stocks for our livestock.
And a third one?
Social services. Things like research, tourism, recreation, and cultural and spiritual values.
You mentioned the economic angle, and that brings up a specific study from our research, TEB.
Yes. TEB, the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity. It was a groundbreaking initiative led by an economist named Pavan Sukhdev, and it was a complete paradigm shift.
How so?
For decades, conservationists had been trying to appeal to morality. Save the tiger because it's beautiful and majestic, and it wasn't working fast enough. TEB came in and said, no, forget that for a second. Save the ecosystem because destroying it is costing the global economy trillions of dollars.
It's a bit cynical, maybe, but I can see how it would be effective.
It's incredibly pragmatic. They started to calculate the actual economic cost of biodiversity loss. If you cut down a mangrove forest to build a luxury hotel, you gain the profit of the hotel, sure, but you lose the storm protection the mangroves provided to the coastline. You lose the fish nursery that supported the local fishermen. You lose the water filtration. TED's job was to put a dollar value on those losses. And almost always, the value of the lost services far outweighs the profit from the hotel.
It forces policymakers to balance the books properly, not just look at the short-term profit.
Exactly. It makes nature visible on the economic balance sheet.
Speaking of high stakes and balancing the books,
Mm-hmm.
I want to take this huge global concept and zoom it right into a specific real-world laboratory, a place that just defies all the odds. Let's talk about India.
India is the ultimate case study for biodiversity. It's officially classified as a mega-diverse country, but the numbers, when you look at the ratios, are just startling.
Hold on.
India occupies only 2.4% of the world's total land area.
Which is tiny on a global scale, a sliver.
It's a sliver. Yet that tiny 2.4% landmass is home to nearly 7% of the world's recorded species. And it does this while simultaneously supporting 18% of the entire human population.
That sounds like a recipe for absolute disaster. A huge number of species, a massive human population, and a very small land area. How is it even possible for India to have so much variety in such a cramped space? It can't just be that it's hot and tropical.
It's geology and geography. It's a story of collision. India sits at the confluence of two of the planet's major biogeographic realms. Think of a realm as a kind of biological continent.
Yeah.
You have the Palearctic realm pushing down from the north. This brings in species adapted to cold, dry, alpine environments. This is the influence of the Himalayas.
Right, so your snow leopards, your bears, that kind of thing.
And then, pushing up from the southeast, you have the Malayan realm. That's the humid, tropical, dense rainforest influence. India is the place where these two massive, ancient biological worlds crash into each other. Plus, you've got the remnants of the ancient supercontinent Gondwanaland in the south. This collision creates a staggering array of what we call biomes.
Biome is a great word.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick tour of a few of them. Because when people think of India, they often have one image in their head, maybe from the Jungle Book. But you start with the Himalayas.
Which are, geologically speaking, very young mountains. They're still growing. You have these high peaks, deep valleys, and extreme altitudinal variation. You can go from a subtropical pine forest to an alpine tundra in just a few hours' drive, vertically.
And then the complete opposite, the desert.
Two kinds, really. You have the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, which is your classic scorching, hot, dry, sandy desert. And then you have the Salt Desert of Gujarat. The Rann of Kutch, which is this vast saline wetland for part of the year. Totally different ecosystems.
And then the Western Ghats. I feel like the Ghats don't get enough global PR. They're not as famous as the Amazon or the Himalayas.
They are an unsung hero of global biodiversity. The Western Ghats are a mountain range that runs parallel to the West Coast. They are much, much older than the Himalayas, and they act like a wall. They intercept the monsoon winds coming off the Arabian Sea, which creates this incredible, lush rainforest that are absolute hotspots of endemism.
Endemism meaning species found there and nowhere else on Earth.
Nowhere else. And we can't forget the islands. Two very different groups. You have the Andaman and Nicobar Islands in the Bay of Bengal. They're volcanic, tropical, and biologically very similar to Southeast Asia. And then you have the Lashadweep Islands off the west coast, which are coral atolls. Completely different origins, completely different life forms.
It's like 5 or 6 different countries' worth of ecosystems all packed into one border. Now, inside these biomes, things get, well, they get weird. I want to talk about some of the botanical curiosities. You sent me a list of plants, and I got stuck on the carnivorous ones for about an hour.
Insectivorous plants are a marvel of evolution. They're a perfect example of adaptation. They usually grow in terrible, soil waterlogged, marshy places where there's very little nitrogen, so they can't get their nutrition from the ground like a normal plant.
So they have to hunt.
I have to hunt.
Hunting plants. It still sounds like something out of science fiction. Let's talk about the Drosera, the sundew.
The sundew is both beautiful and absolutely deadly. It has these long tentacles on its leaves, and at the tip of each one is a tiny drop of sticky glandular fluid.
The dew.
Exactly. In the sunlight, it glitters like morning dew. An insect sees it, thinks, great, a drink of water, and it lands on the leaf and gets instantly glued to the spot. The tentacles then slowly curl inward, wrapping the insect up, and the leaf secretes enzymes to digest it.
A sparkling death trap. And then there are the pitcher plants, the nepenthes. These are the ones that look like little jugs hanging from a vine, right?
Yes, you find them in the hills of Meghalaya, the Garo, Khasi, and Jaintia hills. The leaf itself modifies its shape to form a pitcher or a jar. The rim of the pitcher is slippery and secretes a nectar to attract insects.
The lure.
It's a lure. The insect stands on the rim to have a sip, it slips on the waxy surface, and it falls down into the pitcher. The walls inside are too steep and waxy to climb out. It's a classic pitfall trap.
And the utricularia. The bladderwort, you said these are the speed demons?
They are. These are aquatic plants. They have these tiny vacuum-sealed bladders underwater with a little trapdoor. When a tiny creature, like a water flea, touches the trigger hairs on the door, the seal breaks. The bladder is a low-pressure zone, so the vacuum sucks water and the prey inside in milliseconds. It happens faster than the human eye can even register.
That is just... It's aggressive. But even the trees that don't eat bugs, they're doing things we never really expected. I need you to confirm this fact about the willow tree. Are they actually talking to each other?
They are. It's a combination of chemical warfare and communication. When a willow tree is attacked by caterpillars, the chewing action on the leaves causes damage. The tree responds by releasing specific volatile organic chemicals into the air.
Like a silent alarm, a distress signal.
Exactly. The neighboring willow trees, the ones that aren't being attacked yet, they can smell or detect these chemicals in the air. They interpret the signal as, warning, pests are in the neighborhood.
And so they get ready for the attack.
Before the caterpillars even reach them, the neighboring trees start pumping tannins into their leaves. Tannins are bitter compounds that make the leaves taste awful and become indigestible to the caterpillars. They fortify their defenses based on the warning they receive from their neighbor.
That completely changes how I walk through a forest. It's not silent at all. It's this constant chatter of chemical warnings and signals.
There's a wood wide web happening all around us, all the time, and even underground. Do you know that most of a tree's roots, the fine feeder roots that actually do the work of absorbing water and nutrients, only live for a few weeks?
Really? I always thought of roots as the most permanent, stable part of the tree.
The big, woody anchor roots are. But the fine feeder roots are incredibly dynamic. They are constantly growing, searching for new pockets of nutrients, and then dying off. It's a constant moving system. And surprisingly, the root system of a tree often stores more starch, more energy reserves, than the entire trunk itself. The real life of the tree is largely underground.
That's incredible. Okay, let's shift from the flora to the fauna, the cast of characters. Ecologists have these great titles for animals, like jobs on a movie set. Let's start with keystone species.
The metaphor comes from architecture. In an old stone arch, the keystone is that wedge-shaped stone at the very top. It's not the biggest stone, but it holds the pressure from both sides. If you pull that single stone out,
The whole arch collapses.
the whole thing collapses. A keystone species is a species that has a disproportionately large effect on its environment relative to its abundance.
And the classic examples are usually the big predators, right?
Top predators are often keystone species.
Sure.
Yes. Tigers, lions, crocodiles, wolves. Let's take the tiger in India. If you remove the tiger from an ecosystem, what happens? The deer population, the sambar and the chital, they have no major predator. Their numbers explode. They start to overgraze the landscape. They eat all the grass and saplings. The grass disappears. The insects that relied on that grass then die off. The birds that ate those insects have to leave. The soil starts to erode because there are no plant roots to hold it in place during the monsoon. The river silts up with all that eroded soil, which affects the fish. The entire system unravels. all because you took out that one piece at the top.
So saving the tiger isn't just about saving a beautiful cat. It's about saving the grass and the river and the birds.
It's about saving the integrity of the entire system. Then you have foundation species. They're less like the keystone and more like the stage itself. They physically create the habitat.
Like corals.
Corals are the perfect example. The coral reef is the structure where thousands of other species live, or kelp in a kelp forest. They are the dominant primary producers that build the environment.
And the last category, indicator species. These are like the alarms of the ecosystem.
The canaries in the coal mine. Their presence or their absence tells us something important about the health of the overall environment. Lichens are a fantastic one.
The stuff that grows on trees and old stones.
Exactly. They are incredibly sensitive to sulfur dioxide in the air, a common industrial pollutant. If you walk into a forest and you see trees covered in different kinds of lichen, you can breathe deep. The air is clean. If you're near a city and you see no lichens on the trees at all, that's a strong indicator of air pollution.
And amphibians for water quality.
Yes. Frogs and salamanders breathe, in part, through their skin. Their skin is permeable, so if there are chemical pollutants or toxins in the water, they absorb them directly. They are often the very first to get sick and die. If the frogs in a pond suddenly go silent, it's a very bad sign. The water is probably poisoned.
We have a file here that we've called the Red Data File Specific Species with some really cool or crazy backstories. I have to start with the white rhino. I've always wondered why it's called white when it's so clearly gray.
It's a linguistic tragedy, really. It has absolutely nothing to do with color. The white rhino has a very wide, square mouth that's adapted for grazing on grass. The early Dutch settlers in southern Africa called it the wide rhino-wide, being the Afrikaans word for wide.
No way.
English settlers heard them say wide, and, well, they thought they were saying white.
So it's actually the wide-mouthed rhino.
That's what its name should be. But white stuck. And by contrast, the black rhino, which is also gray, got its name just to differentiate it. It has a hooked, prehensile lip for browsing on bushes. We literally named an entire species based on a simple translation error.
That is amazing. Okay, what about elephants? The wrinkles. Why are they so wrinkly?
It's all about thermodynamics. Elephants are huge and they live in hot climates. They have a real problem with overheating, so the wrinkles on their skin massively increase the total surface area. More surface area means more area for body heat to escape.
Just like a radiator.
It's a biological radiator. And the wrinkles also trap moisture and mud. After a mud bath, a smooth elephant would dry out in a few minutes. A wrinkly elephant stays damp and cool for hours. It's an incredibly engineered cooling system.
But let's move on to a much smaller animal, the pygmy hog.
The world's smallest and rarest wild pig. It's critically endangered, found only in the tall, wet grasslands of Assam in northeast India. But the coolest thing about them, they build a house.
A pig that builds a house.
A nest. It digs a shallow trench in the ground and then it weaves a roof over the top using grass. It's a little grass hut that it sleeps in. This behavior is totally unique among pigs.
And then one of my personal favorites, the red panda, which I have to say is much cuter than the giant panda.
That is a controversial take, but I might just agree with you. They're not actually related to giant pandas. They're in their own unique family. You find them in the temperate forests of the Himalayas, always where there's a bamboo understory. But they're in serious trouble, partly due to something called inbreeding depression. Because their forest habitat is being chopped up into small, isolated islands, the red pandas can't travel to find mates from other family groups. So they end up mating with relatives, with their cousins. This reduces the genetic diversity, going right back to our first point, and it makes the offspring weaker, smaller, and more susceptible to disease.
It connects right back to tier 1, to the genes. We also have the dugong on the list.
The sea cow, a beautiful, gentle marine mammal. It's the only strictly herbivorous marine mammal. They graze on seagrass meadows in shallow coastal waters. Their fate is completely tied to the health of those seagrass beds. If we lose the seagrass, we lose the dugong. They're being hit hard by boat strikes, pollution, and general habitat loss.
And the Gangetic gharial. This is the crocodile with that really long, impossibly skinny snout.
That snout, or rostrum, is a highly specialized tool. It's like a pair of tweezers or chopsticks. It has very little water resistance, so they can snap it sideways incredibly fast to catch fish, which is their primary food. They don't eat big mammals. They're fish specialists. They're critically endangered now, with their last major stronghold being the Chambal River.
And lastly for this section, the Siberian crane.
The ultimate marathon runner. These magnificent white birds migrate thousands and thousands of miles from their breeding grounds in the Arctic tundra of Russia all the way to India to spend the winter, specifically at Keoladeo National Park in Rajasthan.
That's an incredible journey.
It is, and it shows that conservation can't just be a local issue. If Russia destroys the breeding ground, or if countries on the migration path like Afghanistan allow them to be hunted, or if India drains the wetland where they spend the winter, the species dies. It requires international cooperation. Nature just doesn't respect our borders.
It really doesn't. Now, we've talked a lot about the land, but we have to turn our attention to the blue part of the map, the marine engine. I feel like we often skip over this, but you mentioned in the notes that this is where the real work of keeping the planet alive happens.
The ocean is the lifeblood. It truly is. And it all starts with the smallest organisms imaginable, plankton, and specifically phytoplankton.
The plant-like drifters.
Yes. These are microscopic algae just floating in the sunlit upper layer of the ocean, and they produce more than 60% of the world's oxygen.
Let's just pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
60%. That means more than every other breath I take comes from the ocean, not from the rainforests.
Correct. The Amazon is wonderful. We call it the lungs of the planet, but it's the ocean that's really keeping you breathing. But they do something else that is arguably even more critical for us in our current era. They run the biological carbon pump.
Okay, what is that? How does that pump work?
It's a mechanism of almost unbelievable scale. Phytoplankton use sunlight and CO2 to grow, just like plants on land. They literally suck a carbon out of the atmosphere and build their bodies with it. Now, when they die or when they are eaten by zooplankton and then pooped out, that organic matter sinks.
It just falls to the bottom of the ocean.
We call it marine snow. It's this constant, gentle shower of dead plankton, fecal pellets, and other organic debris falling down into the abyss, and it takes that carbon from the surface and locks it away in the deep ocean sediment for thousands, sometimes millions of years. We estimate that this process transfers about 10 gigatons of carbon from the atmosphere to the deep ocean every single year.
10 gigatons. And if that pump stops or even slows down, where does all that carbon go?
It stays in the atmosphere, warming the planet. If the plankton die off due to ocean acidification or warming, that pump breaks. And climate change accelerates into a runaway train.
So saving the plankton is quite literally saving ourselves.
Right.
And the link between these phytoplankton and the bigger fish is the zooplankton.
The animal plankton, things like copepods and krill, they are the grazers of the sea. They graze on the phytoplankton fields. They are the absolutely vital bridge. You cannot have a tuna or a blue whale without the zooplankton there to convert that microscopic plant energy into animal protein. They are the foundation of the entire marine food web.
Moving up the chain, or I guess further down on the floor, we have seagrass and seaweed. I have to admit, I used to think these were the same thing, just green stuff in the water.
A very common misconception. They're worlds apart. Sea grasses are true plants. They're basically the descendants of landgrass that decided to move back into the ocean about 50 million years ago. They have roots, they have veins, they produce flowers and seeds. And because they have roots, they anchor the sediment on the seafloor, they stop coastal erosion. And they are massive carbon sinks, acre for acre, even more efficient than a tropical rainforest.
And seaweed.
Seaweed is algae. It's a much more primitive life form. It doesn't have true roots. It has something called a holdfast, which is just a grip to cling onto a rock. It doesn't drink nutrients from the soil. It absorbs them directly from the water through its fronds or leaves.
And finally, under the sea, corals. You had a note in here about fire corals that I thought was interesting.
Yes, a little public service announcement for any diver listening. Fire coral looks a lot like a normal stony coral. It has that hard calcified structure, but biologically, it's actually much closer to a jellyfish. It's a hydrozoan, and if you accidentally brush against it, it fires thousands of microscopic stinging cells, nematocysts, into your skin. It causes an intense burning sensation, hence the name. So look, but don't touch.
A good rule for all of nature, really. Okay, we have built this incredible, intricate, beautiful picture of diversity, and now we have to face the music. Section 5, threats and extinction. Why are we losing all of this?
We can sort of categorize the drivers of loss into two main buckets. First, you have deterministic processes. These are the things we directly control, cause and effect. Deforestation, pollution, overhunting. If you chop down the forest, the bird that lived there has nowhere to go. It's a direct, predictable outcome.
The chainsaw effect.
Exactly. Then you have stochastic processes. This is basically chance, bad luck. A volcano erupts and covers an island in lava. A new disease unexpectedly sweeps through a population. A freak, once-in-a-century storm hits.
The act of God events.
Right. But here's the problem. Our deterministic actions destroying habitat make populations small and fragmented. And small, fragmented populations are terrifyingly vulnerable to those stochastic bad luck events. A large, healthy population can survive a freak storm. A tiny population of just a few individuals gets completely wiped out. We are essentially making all these species vulnerable to a single roll of the dice.
And one of the biggest tools of destruction we seem to be using is invasive alien species.
It's biological pollution. It's what happens when we move species, either intentionally or accidentally, to places where they don't belong. In India, the list of ecological disasters is terrifying. Take the water hyacinth.
That purple flower that you see clogging up all the rivers and lakes.
It's a beautiful flower. It's native to the Amazon in South America. The British brought it to India during the colonial era for ornamental ponds. But in India, it has no natural enemies, no insects or diseases that eat it, so it just exploded. It forms this thick, impenetrable mat over the surface of the water, blocking all the sunlight. The native underwater plants die, the oxygen levels in the water plummet, and then the fish die. They call it the Terror of Bengal.
And what about on land?
Lantana chimera. It's a shrub with pretty little multicolored flowers, but it's a toxic, aggressive weed. It takes over the forest floor, creating these dense thickets that native herbivores can't eat and can't even walk through. And it prevents the saplings of native trees from getting any sunlight, so the forest can't regenerate. It turns a diverse, complex forest into a sterile lantana monoculture.
And the African catfish.
The mangur. It was brought in for aquaculture because it grows fast and will eat absolutely anything. But inevitably, it escaped into the wild. Now it's in the precious wetlands, like Quilladeo National Park, and it's just a vacuum cleaner for aquatic life. It eats the native fish, the frogs, the insects, even the chicks of water birds.
And there was a tiny wasp mentioned in the notes as well.
The eucalyptus gall wasp, a tiny insect that's causing massive damage to eucalyptus plantations in South India. It just goes to show that even our commercial, man-made forests aren't safe from these biological invasions.
This level of disruption inevitably leads to friction, to conflict, human-wildlife conflict, or HWC.
It's the flashpoint. It's where our expanding world collides with their shrinking one. We fragment the habitat, we put a farm right next to a forest. A deer comes out of the forest to eat the corn because its natural grazing land is gone. The leopard follows the deer out of the forest. The leopard sees a farmer's goat, which is easier to catch than the deer. The leopard takes the goat. The farmer gets angry and, in retaliation, poisons the leopard.
It's a tragic and predictable cycle.
It leads to huge crop damage, loss of livestock, and tragically, loss of human life as well. We need to get better at mitigation, things like barriers, early warning systems, biofences, but we also need to demystify the animals. Let's talk about the black panther for a second.
Yes, the ghost of the forest.
People often think it's a separate, more aggressive, more dangerous species than a normal leopard. But a black panther is just a leopard with a different paint job. It's a genetic condition called melanism. It's an overproduction of the black pigment, melanin. If you look closely at a black panther in the right sunlight, you can still see the faint outline of its spots.
So it's the exact same animal, same behavior, just with a different coat.
Exactly the same. And understanding that helps reduce the fear and the mythology around it. It's not some supernatural monster. It's just a leopard.
So given all these threats, how do we fix this? Section 6, conservation strategies. What's the playbook?
We have two main plays in the book, in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. It's just Latin for on-site and off-site.
In situ is the ideal, right?
Yeah.
Keeping them in the wild.
Yes, that's the gold standard. This means protecting their entire habitat. National parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biosphere reserves. You're not just saving the animal, you're saving its home, its food source, its neighbors. You're saving the whole web.
And ex situ?
Ex situ is the emergency room. It's what you do when the wild is just too dangerous anymore, or when the population numbers have crashed so low they can't recover on their own. This is zoos, botanical gardens, seed banks, even cryopreservation of sperm and eggs. You take them into a protected, captive environment to try and breed them up to safe numbers.
There's a note about the Ecological Biological Park being a great example of this.
It's a fantastic success story. It's the world's first dedicated Huluk gibbon breeding center. The Hulak gibbon is India's only ape, and it's endangered. They're incredibly difficult to breed in captivity, but this center in Arunachal Pradesh is figuring out how to do it. That is, ex situ conservation in action, potentially saving a species from the brink.
Let's go back to the in situ side for a moment. Biosphere reserves. How are they different from a standard national park?
A national park is usually managed with a keep-out philosophy. It's about strict protection. A biosphere reserve is a much more integrated zoning system. Imagine a target with 3 rings. The bullseye at the center is the core zone. This is strictly protected, just like a national park. No human activity allowed, just nature.
The sanctuary.
Exactly. The ring around that is the buffer zone. Here, some limited, low-impact human activity is allowed. Things like scientific research, environmental education, maybe some well-managed ecotourism or sustainable fishing by local communities.
And the outer ring?
The outer ring is the transition zone. This is where people actually live. There are villages, farms, managed forests. The goal here is to work with the local community to promote sustainable development. It tries to integrate human beings into the conservation model rather than just kicking them out, which often doesn't work.
That seems like a much more realistic and sustainable model for the long term. Now, we hear the term hotspot all the time. India has 4 biodiversity hotspots. But this isn't just a term for a popular travel destination, is it?
Not at all. It's a very rigorous scientific classification that was developed by a biologist named Norman Myers back in 1988. To be officially designated as a global biodiversity hotspot, a region has to meet 2 very strict criteria.
Okay, what are they?
1, it must contain at least 1,500 species of endemic vascular plants. That means plants that are found there and absolutely nowhere else on Earth.
So it has to be unique and irreplaceable.
And 2, it must have lost at least 70% of its original primary vegetation.
Wait a second. So to qualify as a hotspot, a place has to be mostly destroyed.
It has to be critically under threat. That's the key. A hotspot is a place that is both irreplaceable and in immediate danger of disappearing forever. It's an emergency room triage list for the planet. It's where we need to focus our conservation efforts to prevent the most extinction.
And India has 4 of these.
It has 4, the Himalayas, the Indo-Burma region, the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka, and Sundaland, which includes the Nicobar Islands.
These are the places where we stand to lose the most, the fastest, if we don't act now.
Correct. But it's important to remember that not all conservation happens on maps drawn by scientists in global organizations. Some of the oldest and most effective conservation is ancient. I'm talking about sacred groves.
This is one of my favorite concepts we came across.
It's true community-led conservation. For centuries, maybe millennia, local communities across India have protected small patches of forest because they believe deities or ancestral spirits reside there. You don't cut a tree or hunt an animal in the sacred grove because you don't want to anger the gods.
And they have real ecological value.
Immense value. Ecologically, these groves are often the last refuge for rare and endangered plants in a landscape that has otherwise been completely converted to agriculture. They protect the headwaters of streams, they recharge aquifers, they conserve the soil. They are biodiversity arcs.
But there's a modern threat to them, something called Sanskritization. What is that?
It's a complex and subtle sociological shift. Historically, the worship in these groves was very simple, very animistic, maybe a sacred stone under a tree, non-invasive. Sanskritization refers to the trend of these local traditions being replaced by more formalized, mainstream, Brahminical temple worship. As communities modernize, they want a proper, concrete temple.
No, they clear the grove to build the temple.
In a tragic irony, yes. They will often chop down the sacred forest to build a concrete shrine to the deity of the forest that they just destroyed. We replace the living, breathing, functional ecological reality with a concrete symbol. We lose the biodiversity, we lose the water recharge, we lose the soil protection, all in the name of religious modernization. It's a cruel paradox.
That is a profound and heartbreaking example of how cultural shifts can have these massive, unintended impacts on the biological world. We've covered so much ground today, from that 1.6% genetic difference that separates us from chimps, to the 10 gigatons of carbon being sucked into the deep ocean by plankton, all the way to the wide rhino.
It's a massive, interconnected web. And I hope, if there's one takeaway, it's that you, the listener, are not just an observer of biodiversity, you are an active participant in it. You're a strand in that web.
Before we wrap up, we always like to leave our listeners with a final provocative thought. We talked a lot about hotspots, these places with incredibly high diversity that are under high threat. But the research brought up a fascinating counter-concept: biodiversity cold spots.
Yes, this is the lingering strategic question for conservationists. All the funding, all the attention, it tends to flow to the hotspots because that's where the most species are. It's the biggest bang for your buck, right? But what about the cold spot?
What defines a cold spot?
These are areas with naturally low species richness. Think of a harsh desert or a high-altitude tundra or a salt flat. There aren't a lot of different species there, but the few species that do live there might be incredibly unique. They might be the last survivors of an ancient evolutionary lineage found nowhere else, perfectly adapted to that extreme environment.
So by being obsessed with the count, by focusing only on where the most animals are, we might be letting these truly unique evolutionary experiments just vanish simply because they live in a boring neighborhood.
That is the exact dilemma. Are we managing for the sheer quantity of species or for the quality and distinctiveness of evolutionary history? If we let a cold spot ecosystem collapse, we might lose an entire ancient branch of the tree of life, even if it was a very thin branch with only a few leaves on it. It's a strategic choice we have to face. Are we letting things slip through the cracks because they aren't hot enough?
A heavy thought to end on: quality versus quantity in the great game of survival. Thank you so much for guiding us through this incredibly complex web of life today.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, next time you see a bug or a weed pushing through the pavement or just a simple tree, maybe take a second to remember the 4 billion years of research and development that went into making it. We'll see you on the next deep dive. At this stage, it is important to understand the ecological relationship involved.
It really is. And, when we use a phrase like ecological relationship, it can sound a bit academic.
A little dry, yeah. Like something from a textbook.
Exactly. Something you'd hear in a lecture hall. But we're not just talking about the basic food chain 101.
You know, the grass, the deer, the tiger.
Right. We're talking about something much more profound that really anchors this whole conversation we're about to have. We're talking about the concept of the umbrella species.
Or a flagship species.
Precisely.
And this is such a fantastic place to start because it completely reframes how we look at conservation. I think a lot of people, they see a poster of a beautiful tiger and think, we need to save the tiger.
Because it's majestic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it's sad to lose this incredible creature. And that's true. It is. But what the sources we're looking at today are telling us is that saving that one charismatic animal isn't really just about that animal.
Not at all.
It's actually a strategy. It's a way to preserve the entire life support system.
The very system that sustains us, too.
Right.
It's functional, It's not just sentimental. Think of it like this. The tiger is what we call an index. It's an index of the health of the entire ecosystem.
Because it's at the top.
It sits at the very peak of the biotic pyramid. So if the tiger population is thriving, it tells you a huge amount about everything happening below it.
Okay, so walk us through that.
Well, it means the prey base is healthy. The kettle, the sambar, the gaur, they're all abundant.
And if they're abundant?
It means the vegetation, the forest cover, is robust. And if the forest is robust, then the soil is stable, which prevents erosion.
Mm-hmm.
And critically, it means the water table is secure.
So wait, when you save a tiger, you're not just saving a big cat.
Yeah.
You are, in effect, preserving water security. You're preserving soil quality for, potentially millions of people who live in and around those areas.
That's it exactly. You save the umbrella.
And everything underneath it gets protected.
Including us. It's a mechanism, really, for saving ourselves.
That's a domino effect I can get behind. So, to set the stage for you listening, this deep dive is going to be a massive journey. We are not staying in one place today.
Not even close.
We're starting in the jungles of India, looking at these huge conservation efforts. Then we're going to zoom way, way out to the chemistry of the atmosphere.
Global warming mechanics.
We'll dive deep into the oceans to look at acidification, and then we're going to end with the solutions, the technological and natural ways we're trying to fight back.
It's a journey from the stripes on a tiger's flank to the invisible molecules in the stratosphere. And the key thing to remember is that it's all connected.
The tiger in the Sunderbands is linked to the melting ice in the Arctic.
And the carbon in the air. Let's do it.
Okay, let's drop into the jungle. Section 1. The Guardians of the Forest. And we have to start with the big one, Project Tiger.
This is really the flagship of Indian conservation. To get why it matters so much, you have to look at the history, which our source material paints in a pretty stark light.
It's great.
It is. The estimates suggest that back in 1900, India had about 40,000 tigers.
40,000.
Yeah.
Just pause on that number. It's hard to even imagine the kind of forest density you'd need to support that many apex predators.
It implies a completely different world, a different landscape. But
Okay.
because of, well, rampant hunting,
Which is often seen as a sport, right?
a sport even state-sponsored at times, that plus massive habitat loss and fragmentation, by 1972, that number had crashed
What?
to a mere 1,800.
Wow. From 40,000 down to 1,800 in about 70 years. That's not a decline, that's a collapse.
It was a free fall. We were genuinely looking at the extinction of the national animal in real time. It was a crisis moment.
So that's the context for 1973.
Yes. In 1973, the government launches Project Tiger. It was a centrally sponsored scheme with a very clear goal: maintain a viable population of tigers for, well, for every reason you can think of: scientific, economic, aesthetic, cultural, and ecological values.
And what's fascinating to me here is the strategy. It wasn't just, stop hunting tigers, though that was obviously part of it. But they fundamentally changed how the land was managed. The sources talk about core zones and buffer zones. Can you unpack that? Because I think that's where the real genius is.
I agree. This is crucial for managing the friction that, it inevitably comes up between wildlife and humans. A tiger reserve isn't one big block of land where people are banned.
It's more nuanced.
Much more. It's divided. First, you have the core zone. These are the critical tiger habitats. They're established based on scientific and objective criteria, and the rule here is strict.
They have to be kept inviolate.
Inviolate. It's a strong word, and it means untouchable. No human activity, no villages, no disturbance, no taking resources out. It is purely for the tiger and the ecosystem to function naturally.
But you can't just do that everywhere. People live in these forests.
You can't, and that's where the buffer zone comes in. This is the area on the periphery, the area surrounding that critical core habitat.
So it's like a gradient, a transition zone.
Exactly. In the buffer zone, you have a lesser degree of habitat protection. It's designed to protect the integrity of the core, but it also allows for coexistence.
How does that work in practice?
It provides habitat dispersal for the tigers, so young males can move out and find new territory, new mates.
Which is vital for genetic diversity.
Absolutely. But at the same time, it harmonizes with the rights of the tribal people living around the reserve. It recognizes their livelihood, their development, their social and cultural rights. It's an attempt to balance the needs of the predator with the needs of the people.
It's a tightrope walk. You squeeze the people too hard, conservation backfires. You squeeze the tiger too hard, the whole ecosystem falls apart.
That's the challenge right there.
Now, something that really jumped out at me in the notes was how we actually count these animals. I mean, they're famously elusive.
The ghosts of the forest.
Right. And I always had this image from old movies, the tracker kneeling in the mud, looking at footprints.
By Puckmark census technique.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Is that still how it's done?
For a very long time, that was the standard. You'd find a pug mark, the footprint, and record its imprints. The theory was that each pug mark is unique.
But it's not perfect.
It's far from perfect. It's incredibly prone to human error.
Yeah.
Think about it. The soil conditions change the print completely. A print in mud looks different from one in sand or wet soil.
And a bit of rain could wash it away.
Or distort it. And you could have multiple trackers accidentally counting the same prints. It's just not a reliable method for getting a hard number.
So what's the new way?
The modern method is what the sources call phase 4 monitoring. It's much more scientific, much more data-driven.
This is where it gets really cool. They use camera traps.
And DNA fingerprinting. And here's a fact I just love. No two tigers have the same stripe pattern.
They're like our fingerprints.
Exactly. So they set up these motion-activated camera traps. A tiger walks by, click, it takes a picture. Then they analyze the stripes on the flanks of the tiger.
And they can identify individuals.
Yes. They feed these images into software that maps the pattern and can say, this is Tiger X, we saw him here on this date.
And the DNA.
That comes from scat tiger droppings. They can collect a sample, analyze the DNA, and identify an individual without ever even seeing it. It allows for a much more robust statistical estimate of the population.
In this high-tech approach, it's paid off, right?
Yeah.
The 2018 census results in our sources. They looked really good.
They did. It was a huge success. The population rose to 2,967 tigers.
And that's what percentage of the world's total?
That's nearly 75% of the world's entire wild tiger population living in India. It's a massive conservation success story. We've seen numbers go up in central India, the Shivalik Hills, the Gangetic Plains.
Which states are leading the pack?
States like Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka are posting huge numbers. It shows the strategy can work.
That is fantastic news. But the source material also has some warnings. It's not a win across the board, is it?
No, conservation is never a straight line. Certain regions, like parts of the Western Ghats, actually saw localized declines.
Why is that?
It could be any number of reasons: increased human pressure, poaching, loss of a specific corridor. And some states like Mizoram and northern West Bengal have disquieting trends. So while the national number is up, the local battles are still very much being fought.
It's a constant effort.
Always. And remember the core idea.
Oh,
The tiger is the index. If it's thriving, the water, the soil, the prey, everything is healthy.
okay, so that's the tiger. Let's talk about the other heavy hitter in the Indian forest, the elephant. Project Elephant is a bit different, isn't it?
It is. With tigers, the immediate threat was this sudden population crash. Extinction was on the table. With elephants, the source describes the threat as attrition.
Attrition. That sounds slower, like a wearing down.
That's exactly what it is. The elephant numbers aren't crashing overnight in the same way, but the pressure on their habitat is just immense.
And India has a lot of the world's elephants.
More than half of the world's Asian elephant population, about 25,000 in the wild. But here's a really worrying statistic. There are only about 1,200 tuskers males with tusks left.
Wow, that's a huge gender skew.
Yeah.
And tuskers are the ones targeted by poachers.
For their ivory, yes. And that's incredibly dangerous for the genetic diversity of the population. But the even bigger issue for elephants is just space.
They need to roam.
They are long-ranging nomads. They need to move vast distances to find food, water, mates. They are not designed to stay put in one small national park.
And that brings us to the absolutely vital concept of corridors.
Yes. An elephant corridor is basically a narrow strip of land. It could be forested, it could be something else. But it connects two larger habitats. It forms a conduit for them to move.
Like a highway for elephants.
A biological highway. And the sources have identified 150 of these corridors in India. They are critical.
But I'm looking at a stat here that says only 24% of these corridors have complete forest cover. That seems dangerously low.
That is the problem. Most of them are fragmented. They're sliced through by roads, by railways, coal mines, holiday resorts.
So the highway has a roadblock.
Or a 6-lane intersection with no traffic lights. Imagine trying to cross that to get to your kitchen. That's what the elephants face. And when you block a corridor, the elephant doesn't just vanish. It has to go somewhere else.
And somewhere else is often a village, a crop field.
Exactly, which leads directly to conflict, what we call man-animal conflict. It's a huge theme in conservation.
This is a vicious cycle.
It is. Elephants raid crops because their natural path is blocked, so people retaliate to protect their livelihoods. It's tragic for both sides.
So how is the government trying to manage that?
Well, there are campaigns. Things like Hathi Mir Safi, which means elephant, my friend, and this other great phrase, take Gaja to the Praja.
Taking the elephant to the people.
The goal is to build goodwill and awareness, to involve the local communities in conservation rather than making them feel like the elephant is just a pest or a danger. It's about changing the narrative from conflict to coexistence.
I also saw a note about something called MIKE. M-I-K-E. Sounds like a person's name.
It does. It's an acronym. It stands for the Monitoring of Illegal Killing of Elephants program.
And what does it do?
It's mandated by CITES, that's the big International Convention on Trade in Endangered Species.
Yeah.
The goal is to measure the levels and trends in illegal hunting across the entire range of the elephant.
Not just in one country.
No, continent-wide. It helps them figure out why trends are changing. Is it a sudden spike in poaching for ivory? Or is it an increase in retaliatory killings by farmers? That data helps them make better enforcement decisions.
Okay, let's move from the ground to the sky. We have to talk about Project Vulture. This story, honestly, it shocked me when I was reading the prep material.
It is arguably one of the fastest, most catastrophic ecological collapses in recorded history.
We think of charismatic animals, but this is intense.
The population of the gyps vultures, that's the oriental white-backed, the slender-billed, and the long-billed, it declined by somewhere between 97 and 99%.
99%. That's not a decline, that's a deletion. You're effectively wiping a species off the map.
They almost vanished. And for a long time, nobody knew why. It was a complete mystery. Was it a new virus? Were they starving?
And the culprit turned out to be a painkiller.
A simple painkiller, diclofenac sodium. It's a nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drug, an NSAID. It was given to cattle to reduce inflammation and pain.
And it worked great for the cows.
It's cheap, it's effective. But when a cow that had been treated with this drug died, the vultures, being scavengers,
They do what vultures do. They clean up the carcass.
and it turns out diclofenac is a deadly poison to them.
What does it do to them?
It causes acute kidney failure, specifically a condition called visceral gout. Uric acid accumulates in their tissues. It was killing them in droves.
That is just tragic. A bird that has evolved over millions of years to be this perfect sanitation crew for the ecosystem.
Wiped out by a cheap veterinary drug.
So how do you even begin to fix that? You can't just tell the vultures which carcasses are safe to eat.
You can't. You have to clean up their food supply. So the first step was the government banning diclofenac for veterinary use. But they went a step further. They established these things called vulture safety zones.
Okay.
A VSZ extends 150 kilometers around a known vulture colony. And within that zone, they have my absolute favorite term from the source material: vulture restaurants.
Vulture restaurants. I'm guessing they don't have a Michelin star?
Not quite. They serve one thing: diclofenac-free carcasses. It's a controlled feeding site.
How does that work?
Local communities will inform the forest department when one of their animals dies. The department comes, tests the animal for diclofenac. If it's clean, it goes on the menu at the restaurant.
And if it's not clean?
They pay the owner for the animal and dispose of it safely. It's a brilliant way to guarantee the birds have a safe food source while the drug is slowly phased out of the whole system.
That's incredibly ingenious. Okay, 2 more key species before we leave the land. First, the ghost of the mountains.
Project Snow Leopard.
This one seems especially difficult.
The habitat alone makes it a huge challenge. They live at altitudes above 3,000 meters. We're talking the high Himalayas, the trans-Himalayas.
And they don't respect borders, do they?
Not at all. A snow leopard might have breakfast in India and dinner in China. They inhabit the high-altitude regions of 12 different countries: India, Nepal, Bhutan, China, Mongolia, Russia. The list goes on.
Which means you can't save them in just one country.
It's impossible. You need international cooperation. And that's why the sources highlight the GSLEP program.
The Global Snow Leopard and Ecosystem Protection Program.
It's a high-level alliance, an intergovernmental group of all 12 of those range countries, all trying to work together to save this one species.
And finally, a project that's been in the news a lot lately, Project Cheetah. This is just wild to me, literally bringing a top predator back after it went extinct in India.
It's a historic project. The cheetah was officially declared extinct in India in 1952.
And why did they go extinct?
A combination of things. Coursing, which was a type of hunting with them. Bounties, sport hunting, and just massive conversion of their grassland habitats. It was the only large wild mammal to go extinct in independent India.
So Project Cheetah is an attempt to undo that?
It is, and it's the world's first intercontinental large carnivore translocation.
They brought them all the way from Africa.
From Namibia to Kuno National Park in India. And the goal isn't just to have cheetahs for people to see on safari. The goal is to reestablish a top predator to save the grassland ecosystems.
So just like the tiger is the umbrella for the forest.
The cheetah can be the umbrella for the grasslands. It's a bold ecological experiment. It shows that conservation isn't just about holding on to what we have. Sometimes it's about restoration.
It's incredible. Okay, let's get our feet wet. Section 2. Aquatic guardians. And we have to start with the national aquatic animal, which I honestly didn't know until reading these notes, is the Ganges River dolphin.
A truly fascinating creature. It can only survive in fresh water. It lives in the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna, and the Karnafuli-Sangu river systems. But here's the most unique thing about them.
What's that?
They're essentially blind.
Blind. How do they survive?
Well, they live in this murky, silty river water where eyes are practically useless anyway, so they've evolved to hunt using ultrasonic sound, echolocation.
Like a bat or a submarine.
Exactly. The sound bounces off fish and other prey, and it allows them to see a detailed image in their mind. It's nature's sonar.
But living in the Ganges, I mean, I have to imagine that poses some massive challenges for them today.
Huge challenges. The noise from river traffic interferes with their echolocation. It would be like you trying to listen to a whisper at a loud rock concert.
They can't hear their food.
Right. Irrigation canals divert the water they need, reducing the depth of the river. And of course, there's pollution. Industrial and sewage runoff makes the water toxic. The reports say there are about 3,700 of them left.
Okay, moving from the river to the coast. Sea turtles. And specifically, the olive ridleys.
Yes. The coast of Orissa is world famous for their mass nesting sites. They're called aribatas.
What happens there?
Thousands upon thousands of female turtles all come ashore at the same time on the same beaches to lay their eggs. It's an incredible natural spectacle. But they face a very modern threat: light pollution.
Light? How does light hurt a turtle?
It's not the adults, it's the hatchlings. When the baby turtles emerge from the sand at night, they are biologically programmed to look for the brightest horizon.
Which should be the ocean.
The reflection of the moon and the stars on the water, that's their cue to head to the sea. But now, with streetlights, ports, hotels all along the coast, the land is often brighter than the sea.
Oh, no.
The hatchlings get disoriented. They head inland instead of towards the water, and they die of dehydration or get run over by cars or eaten by feral dogs.
That is just heartbreaking. Such a simple thing,
Yeah.
a light bulb, and it breaks the fundamental programming of a species.
It does. Trawling is another huge issue, getting caught in fishing nets. The project in Orissa is focused on managing coastal lighting and enforcing trawler regulations during the nesting season.
And one last aquatic friend to mention, the dugong,
The sea cow.
a very gentle giant.
They're herbivores found in seagrass beds. India has just established its first dugong conservation reserve in Palk Bay to protect them. And they're really important because they maintain the health of those seagrass meadows, which, as we'll see later, are vital carbon sinks.
Okay, we've looked at the animals, we've seen the guardians of the forest and the water, but now we need to pull the lens back and look at the stage they're all acting on, because the environment itself is changing. Section 3, the changing atmosphere.
This is where we have to zoom out. And first, it's really important we get our definition straight. People often use climate and weather interchangeably.
But they're not the same thing.
Not at all. The source has a great little saying for it. Climate is what you expect. Weather is what you get.
I like that. So weather is, am I going to need an umbrella today? And climate is, it's probably going to be hot in July.
Exactly. Weather is the daily state of the atmosphere. Climate is the long-term average, usually measured over 30 years or more.
And similarly, global warming isn't the same as climate change.
Correct. Global warming is just one piece of it. It's the temperature rise, the fact that the Earth is getting hotter. Climate change is the bigger picture. It includes the warming, but also all the side effects.
Like changes in rainfall.
Changes in rainfall, more extreme events like hurricanes, melting ice caps, shifting seasons, all of it.
So let's talk about the mechanism, the greenhouse effect. I feel like this gets a bad rap, but the notes say it's actually a natural and necessary process.
It is absolutely essential for life on Earth. Think of it like a blanket around the planet. The sun sends energy to Earth. Some of that energy bounces back towards space. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere trap some of that bouncing energy.
And that's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. Without that natural greenhouse effect, the average temperature of the Earth's surface would be minus 19 degrees Celsius.
We'd be a frozen snowball.
A lifeless, frozen planet. The greenhouse effect is what keeps us at a comfortable, livable plus 15 degrees Celsius.
So the problem isn't the blanket itself.
The problem is that human activities are thickening the blanket. We're adding more and more greenhouse gases, and so we're trapping too much heat.
Okay, let's go through the villains then. The gases that are thickening this blanket. First up, water vapor.
This one surprises people. It's actually the biggest overall contributor to the natural greenhouse effect, but it's a bit different from the others.
How so?
Humans don't directly emit it in quantities that really change the climate. The issue with water vapor is that it's an amplifier.
A feedback loop.
Exactly. As the world warms from other gases, like CO2, more water evaporates from the oceans. That puts more water vapor into the air. More water vapor traps more heat, which causes more warming, which causes more evaporation.
Okay, then the big one that everyone talks about. Carbon dioxide. CO2.
This is the primary concern. It mainly comes from burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, and from deforestation. When you cut down a forest, you lose its ability to store carbon, and if you burn it, you release all that stored CO2.
And the scary thing about CO2 is how long it lasts.
It's incredibly long-lived. It persists in the atmosphere for centuries.
So the emissions from today will still be warming the planet for our great-great-grandchildren.
That's right. Now, what about methane? I've heard it's actually worse than CO2.
In the short term, yes, it is. Methane, or CH4, is much more potent. Over a 20-year period, it traps about 80 times more heat than CO2. But it has a shorter life in the atmosphere, about 12 years.
And where does it come from?
Natural sources like wetlands are a big one,
Yeah.
but the human sources are huge. Livestock, specifically enteric fermentation.
Which is a polite way of saying cow burps.
Pretty much. Also, rice paddies and landfills are major sources of methane.
Then we have nitrous oxide and these things called fluorinated gases.
Nitrous oxide, N2O, comes largely from agriculture, specifically from synthetic fertilizers. It's about 300 times more potent than CO2. But the fluorinated gases, HFCs, SF6, these are the real heavy hitters. They're called high GWP gases.
GWP being global warming potential.
Right, and some of these numbers are just unbelievable.
Give me an example.
Okay, sulfur hexafluoride, or SF6. It's used in electrical transmission equipment. It has a global warming potential of 23,900.
Wait, so 1 ton of SF6.
Warms the planet as much as 23,900 tons of CO2.
That is just mind-boggling. It's a super pollutant.
It is, and they're used in things like refrigeration and electronics. We have to be incredibly careful with them.
And finally, the notes mention aerosols. These aren't gases, right?
No, they're tiny particles suspended in the air,
Hmm.
like black carbon, which is basically soot.
And how does that cause warming?
2 ways. It warms the air directly by absorbing sunlight, but maybe worse, when it falls on snow and ice, say, in the Himalayas, it darkens the surface.
And dark surfaces absorb more heat.
Exactly. It reduces what's called the albedo, or the reflectivity. Clean, white snow reflects sunlight back into space. Sooty snow absorbs it and melts much, much faster. There's also something called brown carbon, which comes from burning biomass.
Yeah.
So the atmosphere is heating up, the blanket is getting thicker,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a side effect of all this carbon that I think is even scarier in some ways because it's invisible. Section 4, the evil twin.
Ocean acidification.
This gets overlooked so often.
It does. The oceans are really the unsung heroes of climate change. They act as this massive buffer. They've absorbed about 1/3 of all the anthropogenic CO2 we've ever emitted.
But there's a cost to that.
A huge cost. When CO2 dissolves in seawater, it reacts with the water, H2O, to form carbonic acid.
Carbonic acid. So the ocean is literally becoming more acidic.
Well, technically, the ocean is naturally slightly alkaline or basic. Its pH is around 8.1, so it's becoming less alkaline, but the trend is absolutely towards acidification. The pH has already dropped by about 0.1 units since the Industrial Revolution.
And 0.1 doesn't sound like a lot.
But the pH scale is logarithmic. So that 0.1 drop represents about a 26% increase in acidity.
And why does this matter for marine life? You have great analogy for this in the notes.
The brick stealing analogy.
Let's hear it.
Okay, imagine you're a marine organism that builds a shell or a skeleton. A coral, a clam, an oyster, even tiny plankton. To build your home, you need building materials. You need bricks.
Okay, I'm a coral, I need bricks.
Your bricks are carbonate ions that are floating around in the seawater. You grab those carbonate ions, you combine them with calcium, and you build your calcium carbonate shell. Simple enough.
Got it.
But here comes the problem. The chemical reaction that forms carbonic acid from CO2 also consumes those carbonate ions. It binds them up, turning them into bicarbonate. So the more CO2 we pump into the ocean,
The fewer bricks there are available for me to build my shell.
the ocean is literally stealing your bricks before you can even lay the foundation.
That is terrifying. So it's not just that the acid dissolves the shells later on, it's that they can't even build them properly in the first place.
It's both. And this leads to this concept of saturation horizons. This is the depth in the ocean below which shells naturally start to dissolve. Deep, cold water is naturally more corrosive.
Right.
But as acidification gets worse at the surface, that horizon is rising. It's moving up towards the surface, squeezing marine life into a smaller and smaller safe zone at the top of the water column.
And I'm guessing not all shells are created equal.
No. There are 2 main forms of calcium carbonate, aragonite and calcite. Aragonite is more soluble, meaning it dissolves more easily, and unfortunately that's what most corals use to build their skeletons, so they're the first to suffer.
There's also a mention here of upwelling trouble. What's that about?
So in many coastal areas, you have a natural process called upwelling, where deep ocean water comes to the surface. Usually, this is great, it brings up nutrients that fuel the entire food web and support massive fisheries.
But there's a catch.
There's the catch. Remember how we said deep water is naturally more acidic and CO2 rich? So when you combine that naturally corrosive deep water with the human-caused acidification at the surface, you get a double whammy. It can create conditions right on the coast that are literally deadly for any shell-building organisms.
So if I'm an oyster farmer in the Pacific Northwest, for example, this is catastrophic news.
It's already been catastrophic for them. It affects the entire food web. If the tiny shelled plankton at the base of the food web can't survive, then the fish that eat them can't survive, and so on up the chain.
That is heavy. But let's shift gears now to a different atmospheric crisis. one where we actually have some good news to share. Section 5, the hole in the sky.
Ozone depletion.
This is a great example of how location really matters. We're talking good versus bad ozone.
Right. Ozone down here in the troposphere at ground level is bad. It's a pollutant, it's a key component of smog, and it's harmful to breathe.
But the ozone way up high in the stratosphere, that's the good stuff.
That is our shield. The ozone molecule, O3, is incredibly efficient at absorbing harmful ultraviolet, or UVB, radiation from the sun.
And without that shield,
that UVB radiation reaches the surface, and the impacts are nasty. For humans, we're talking about increased rates of skin cancer, particularly non-melanoma, cataracts in our eyes, and DNA damage. It can even suppress our immune systems.
and it's not just a problem for humans. The sources mention plant psychology.
I love that term. It's not really psychology, of course, but UVB radiation affects the very form of plants, how they distribute their biomass, and even the timing of when they flower. It can completely alter the competitive balance of species in an ecosystem.
So what's the status of the ozone hole? We hear about it less these days.
We measure ozone in what are called Dobson units. A healthy ozone layer is around 300 Dobson units. The hole is defined as an area where it drops below 220.
And that mostly forms over Antarctica, right?
Yes, because the extreme cold of the polar winter creates these polar stratospheric clouds, which provide a surface for the chemical reactions that destroy ozone to happen very, very quickly when the sun returns in the spring.
But you said there's good news.
The good news is that the world came together. We realized that human-made chemicals, ozone-depleting substances like CFCs, were the cause. The Montreal Protocol was signed in 1987 to phase them out.
And it worked.
It's working. India has made huge strides in shifting away from ODS to eco-friendly technologies. The ozone hole is showing clear signs of healing. It's proof that we can solve global atmospheric problems when we cooperate.
That does give me some hope, and we're going to need that hope because Section 6 is about the fallout, the impacts we're already seeing on land and water. And we have to start in the Himalayas, the water tower of Asia.
This is absolutely critical for India and the whole region. The Himalayan glaciers are the source of the Indus, the Ganga, and the Brahmaputra rivers.
Which support hundreds of millions of people.
Billions, if you look at the entire downstream area. But these glaciers are shrinking, and they're shrinking fast. The source notes that the Gangotri Glacier, one of the largest, is retreating at a rate of about 38 meters per year.
38 meters a year. That's incredible.
It is, and the source lays out this frightening chain of events. First, you get the melting. This meltwater forms large glacial lakes, often dammed by unstable walls of ice and rock.
I can see where this is going.
If those unstable dams break, you get a GLOF, a glacial lake outburst flood. These are catastrophic.
Yeah.
A wall of water, rock, and ice comes thundering down the valley, destroying everything in its path.
But the long-term threat isn't a flood, it's the opposite.
Exactly. Once the glaciers are gone, that buffer, that frozen reservoir is gone. The rivers stop being perennial, they become seasonal, they'll flood during the monsoon, and then run nearly dry in the hot season.
And for a country like India that's so dependent on agriculture.
That's a nightmare scenario for water and food security.
Then there's the other water problem, sea level rise.
This comes from two main things. First, thermal expansion. As water warms up, it expands. It takes up more space.
Simple physics.
Simple physics. Second is the melting of land-based ice sheets and glaciers, which adds new water to the ocean. For India, with its long coastline, this is a huge threat. Think about the Sundarbans, the tiger habitat we started with. Much of it is just barely above sea level. We risk the complete submergence of that unique ecosystem.
And it's not just losing land, it's what happens to the water.
Salinization. As the sea level rises, salt water pushes further inland. It contaminates the freshwater aquifers that coastal villages rely on for drinking water and irrigation.
And this all leads us to maybe the scariest concept in the entire source material. Tipping points.
Yeah.
The point of no return.
This is where our linear way of thinking can get us into trouble. We tend to think, a little more warming equals a little more damage.
They gradual change.
But a tipping point isn't gradual, it's a threshold. If you cross it, a small change can push a whole system into a completely new and often irreversible state. The analogy is pushing a boulder up a hill. You can push it halfway up, and if you stop, it just rolls back to where it was. But if you push it just over the peak, it starts rolling down the other side on its own, and you can't stop it.
What are the risks right now? Where are we?
The sources are pretty clear that between 1.1 and 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which is pretty much where we are right now, We are already in the danger zone for tipping points like the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet.
Which would mean meters of sea level rise.
Eventually, yes, and the widespread die-off of tropical coral reefs.
And if we go over 2 degrees of warming,
Then we start looking at the really scary ones. The collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation.
that's the big ocean current.
It's the current that brings warm water north to Europe and regulates weather patterns for much of the world. If that stops or slows dramatically, the weather systems we rely on for agriculture could be thrown into chaos. We also risk the Amazon dieback, where the rainforest dries out and turns into a savanna, releasing billions of tons of carbon.
Okay, that is the doom. It's heavy. But we can't end there. Section 7 is about fighting back. We aren't just watching this happen.
We are developing solutions, mitigation and adaptation.
So let's start with carbon sequestration. Hiding the carbon away.
Right. There's geologic sequestration, which is where you capture CO2 at a power plant or industrial facility and pump it deep underground into stable rock formations or depleted oil wells.
But there's a star player mentioned in the notes that I think is much more exciting. Blue carbon.
This is incredibly promising. Blue carbon is just the carbon that's stored in coastal and marine ecosystems.
Mangroves, seagrasses.
Mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes. And the reason they're so important is their efficiency.
They're better at this than regular forests.
Much better. These systems can sequester or bury carbon up to 5 times faster than a tropical forest. And because they're constantly trapping sediment, they lock that carbon away in the mud for centuries, even millennia.
And they have co-benefits.
Massive co-benefits. They act as nurseries for countless fish species, and they buffer the coastlines against storm surge and erosion, the very things that climate change is making worse. Saving mangroves is a double or even triple win.
Then we have market mechanisms.
Yeah.
Things like carbon credits.
The idea here is to put a price on pollution. A carbon credit is basically a permit that allows a company to emit 1 ton of CO2.
And you can trade them.
Right. And under things like the Kyoto Protocol, it created mechanisms where developed countries could invest in clean technology projects in developing countries. By doing that, they could earn credits to offset their own emissions. It's a way to incentivize the transfer of green technology.
And then we get to the wild stuff. The sci-fi solutions.
Yeah.
Geoengineering.
This is controversial and for very good reason. This is actively trying to hack the planet's climate system.
Okay, give me an example.
One idea is cirrus cloud thinning. The idea is you inject ice nuclei into high-altitude cirrus clouds to make them dissipate faster, which would allow more heat to escape from Earth into space.
Wow.
Marine cloud brightening. You would have a fleet of ships spraying a fine mist of sea salt into the air over the ocean. The salt particles would act as seeds for cloud droplets, making the clouds whiter and more reflective, so they bounce more sunlight back to space.
And what about ocean iron fertilization?
The theory there is that many parts of the ocean are limited by a lack of iron. So if you dump iron dust into the ocean, you'd trigger a massive bloom of phytoplankton.
Which eats CO2.
They take up CO2 through photosynthesis. Then when they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, hopefully taking that carbon with them and sequestering it in the deep sea.
What's the risk?
The risk is massive, unintended ecosystem disruption. We have no idea what happens when we mess with the base of the marine food web on that scale. You could create toxic algae blooms or vast oxygen-depleted dead zones.
And the most extreme one? Stratospheric aerosol injection.
This is basically trying to mimic a large volcanic eruption. Volcanoes cool the planet temporarily by spewing sulfates into the stratosphere, which reflects sunlight. This proposal is to have a fleet of high-altitude aircraft constantly spraying sulfates up there to do the same thing.
It sounds like a desperate measure.
It's a break glass in case of emergency option that comes with a whole host of potential side effects we don't understand, like changing global rainfall patterns.
So maybe let's stick to the stuff we know works. Renewable energy.
Solar, wind, geothermal, biomass. The sources also highlight hydrogen, specifically green hydrogen. But it's really important to remember that hydrogen is only as clean as the energy source you use to create it.
What do you mean?
Well, you make hydrogen by splitting water, but that process takes a lot of energy. If you use energy from a coal-fired power plant to split the water, it's not a green fuel. You need to use renewable energy like solar or wind to create the hydrogen for it to be a true climate solution.
We have covered so much ground today. I mean, from the stripes of a tiger in 1973 to hydrogen fuel cells, from the deep ocean to the high stratosphere. So let's tie it all together. What does this all mean?
It means we have to synthesize these ideas. We started this whole deep dive with that phrase, the ecological relationship, and I think we see now it's not just the tiger eating the
Well, it's
deer.
so much bigger than that.
It is the relationship between the coal being burned in a factory somewhere, the CO2 molecule that releases into the air, the chemical reaction that happens in the ocean that steals the bricks from a coral, the melting of a glacier in the Himalayas, and the ultimate survival of that tiger living in the sinking Sundarbans.
It is all one interconnected system, the life support system we talked about at the start.
Exactly. The concept of one health. You cannot have healthy humans on a sick planet. The source material is very clear that preserving genetic variation in ecosystems is absolutely critical for our own scientific progress and for the survival of millions of rural people who depend directly on them.
And that brings us to our final thought. Something for you to chew on after this is over.
We talked about that high-tech monitoring of tigers using their DNA from scat. Well, that kind of technology is going global. There's a concept now called DNA barcoding.
Like scanning a barcode on a product at the supermarket.
Exactly like that, but for life. It's a method for rapidly identifying any species using just a short, standardized gene sequence from its DNA.
So you could take a sample of water from a river and know every species of fish and insect in it.
Precisely. And there's a massive global mission underway right now called BioScan. It was launched in 2019. And its goal is to race to catalog all life on Earth, to build the complete reference library of biodiversity. They want to finish by 2026.
That sounds absolutely amazing. But I sense a but coming.
Here's the provocative thought. We are racing to catalog all of life at the exact same moment. We are risking losing it to the tipping points we just discussed. We are meticulously creating an inventory of species as they teeter on the very edge of extinction.
So the question is, will we finish building the library before the library itself burns down?
That is the race we're in. And the outcome depends entirely on the choices we make about energy, about conservation, about consumption, right now in this next decade.
That is a thought that will definitely keep me up tonight. But it's also a powerful call to action. We know the problems, and as we saw in that fighting back section, we have the solutions.
We just need the collective will to use them.
Thank you for taking this incredible deep dive with us. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. A pleasure, as always.
And to you, our listener, thanks for sticking with us through the jungle, the ocean, and the atmosphere. Stay curious. At this stage, it is important to understand the ecological relationship involved.
That's a very diplomatic way of putting it, because when we talk about this particular ecological relationship, we're not talking about, something harmonious like bees and flowers.
No, not at all. The
Yeah.
sources make it clear we're talking about a feedback loop that has, for all intents and purposes, gone critical. This is the problem state.
Exactly, the problem state. And it's not some abstract philosophical thing. It's a very direct, very physical causal chain that the science has laid out with, well, terrifying clarity.
Right, you can literally draw a line. It starts with human activity. Specifically, digging up ancient compressed plant matter and setting it on fire to power our lives.
To generate electricity, to run our cars, to build our cities. And that action directly leads to the next link in the chain, changing the atmospheric concentration of certain gases.
Gases that trap heat, which leads to, well, heat. More of it.
And that's the key thing to grasp. That extra heat doesn't just make for warmer summers. It destabilizes everything, the entire planetary system. So we shouldn't even really just say global warming.
It's more like global destabilization.
It really is. The link is it's undeniable at this point. You burn the fossil fuel, you release the carbon, you trap the heat. It's basic physics.
But because the problem is so systemic, woven into every aspect of our global economy, the solution has to be systemic too. It feels like we're looking at a two-front war here based on these documents.
That's a great way to frame it. On one side, you've got the hardware, the physical stuff.
The actual machines, the need for alternative energy sources, getting away from these finite polluting fuels and moving towards renewable energy. Solar panels, wind turbines, all of it.
Exactly. That's the technological pillar. But on the other front, you have the software. The global operating system, if you will, the governance.
Because you can have the most efficient solar panel ever invented.
You could have a panel that runs on moonlight. But if you don't have a global political framework to manage the transition, to handle the economics, the trade issues, the questions of fairness and equity, you're just stuck.
You're going nowhere. You need those structures, those agreements, to manage complete overhaul of the global energy system.
So that's really our mission for this deep dive. We've got these two huge stacks of research in front of us. One is just dense with acronyms, treaties, diplomatic language. That's the International Political Framework, UNFCCC, COP19 DCs.
And the other stack is full of physics equations, engineering diagrams, efficiency curves. That's the technological solutions.
And what we want to do is connect them. We're going to connect the arguments happening in a conference room in Glasgow to the design of a turbine blade spinning over the North Sea.
The core argument here, and what I really took from the readings, is that you simply cannot understand one of these pillars without the other.
You can't. The politics provides the will to act, the treaties, the targets, that's the collective decision to move, and the technology provides the way.
So let's start with the political story. Where does this whole thing even begin? It feels like this conversation has been going on my entire life, but in the grand scheme of things, it's all incredibly recent.
In geological time, it's less than a blink of an eye. Even in human political history, it's new. The modern era of climate diplomacy really kicks off in one specific place and time. 1992, Rio de Janeiro. The Earth Summit.
The Earth Summit. I've seen the photos from that. It looks wild. It wasn't just guys in suits. You had world leaders, sure, but also indigenous activists, scientists, NGOs.
It was a scene. It really was. It was sort of the Woodstock of environmental diplomacy. The official name was the UN Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED for short. But everyone, absolutely everyone, just calls it the Earth Summit.
And this is the moment where the world, as a collective, basically sat up and said, okay, we have a problem, and we need a formal, official way to talk about it.
That's it. This is the birthplace of the UNFCCC.
The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay, let's really double-click on that word framework, because I think it's crucial.
It's the most important word in the whole title. It was a framework convention. Think of it like building a house. The framework is the blueprint and the foundation. It's the agreement that, yes, we're going to build a house together on this spot.
But it doesn't specify what color to paint the walls or what kind of furniture to put inside.
Precisely. It was a global handshake, a collective acknowledgement that the house is on fire and we should probably form a fire brigade. But, and this is key, it didn't actually legally compel anyone to pick up a hose and start spraying.
So the objective was stated as stabilization, wasn't it?
Yes. The formal objective was for countries to cooperatively consider what they could do to limit average global temperature increases and, importantly, to cope with the impacts that were already considered inevitable.
Wait, back up. In 1992, they were already admitting some impacts were inevitable. That seems pretty strong for that early on.
It does, but it shows you that the science was actually way ahead of the politics. And to understand why, you have to rewind just a couple more years to 1988.
Okay, what happened in 88?
That's when two UN bodies, the World Meteorological Organization and the UN Environment Program, got together and established the IPCC.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now let's pause here, because this is a huge source of confusion for a lot of people. I think the public image of the IPCC is like a bunch of scientists in UN lab coats somewhere measuring CO2 in beakers.
That is a massive misconception, and it's a really important one to clear up. The IPCC does not conduct any original research. They don't have a lab. They don't run climate models. They don't monitor weather stations.
So what? What do they actually do?
Think of them as the world's most important high-stakes book report writers. They are an assessment body. Their job is to review, synthesize, and assess the thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed scientific papers being published by scientists all over the world.
So they take all the research from universities, national labs, everywhere, and distill it down.
They distill it down into a comprehensive picture of the state of knowledge. Their job is to tell the policymakers, okay, here's what the global scientific community knows, here is how confident we are in that knowledge, and here are the likely consequences if you choose to ignore it.
And the sources are very clear that they are policy neutral.
Crucially so. They are policy relevant, but policy neutral. They will never, ever tell a politician, you must pass a carbon tax. Never.
So what do they say?
They just lay out the facts. They say, if you continue on this emissions pathway, the temperature will likely rise by X degrees, leading to Y amount of sea level rise and Z increase in extreme weather. Then they'll say, if you want to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, you must follow a pathway that looks like this. It's up to the politicians to choose.
So in 1990, 2 years before the Rio Summit, the IPCC drops its very first assessment report. And the headline is basically, human activities are substantially increasing greenhouse gases.
That was the gunshot that started the race. That report landed like a bombshell and created the political momentum for the Earth Summit.
Okay, so the alarm bell rings in 1990. Rio happens in 92. We get the UNFCCC. How is this whole thing actually structured? Because, honestly, when I hear news reports about COP26 or COP27, my eyes just glaze over at the numbering.
It's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. You can think of this entire machine as having three main parts. First, you have the supreme decision-making body. That's the COP.
The Conference of the Parties.
Exactly. And the parties just means the countries that signed the treaty. The COP is basically the annual board meeting for the planet. It's where everyone gets together to review progress and negotiate the next steps.
So COP1 in Berlin was the first meeting. COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh was the 27th meeting. Simple
Right, yeah,
enough.
exactly. The second part is the Secretariat. They're the permanent staff based in Bonn, Germany. They keep the lights on, organize the meetings, handle the documents. They're the support structure.
And the third piece.
This one is crucial. It's the SBSTA, the subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice.
SBSTA. That really sounds like a villain's robot from a bad 80s sci-fi movie.
It's maybe less exciting than a robot, but it's absolutely vital. The SBSTA acts as the translator. They are the bridge between the world of science and the world of diplomacy.
How so?
They take the incredibly dense, complex, 1,000-page reports from the IPCC and turn them into digestible information that the diplomats and ministers at the COP can actually use to negotiate. They translate the physics into policy options.
You connect the science to the policy.
Without that link, the diplomats would be flying blind.
Okay, so we've got the framework established in '92. Everyone pats themselves on the back. They signed a historic document. But did that 1992 agreement actually force anyone to cut their emissions?
That's the big question, isn't it?
And the answer is no, it didn't. It encouraged the industrialized countries to stabilize their emissions at 1990 levels,
Right.
but there were no legal teeth. It was purely voluntary.
Like a New Year's resolution.
A global New Year's resolution. And just like most resolutions, it didn't take long for everyone to realize that just trying our best wasn't going to cut it.
So what happened? By 1995, at the very first COP meeting in Berlin, the parties were already admitting this. They issued something called the Berlin Mandate.
The Berlin Mandate. And what did it say?
It was a formal acknowledgement that the original commitments in the convention were, and this is the direct quote, inadequate. They needed something with teeth. And that admission, that failure, is what paved the way for the first major attempt at a binding global treaty, the Kyoto Protocol.
Okay, now we're getting into the real drama. Kyoto. Adopted in Japan in 1997 at COP3. This is where the rubber finally meets the road.
Or maybe where the rubber meets the international lawyers. This was a whole new era. This was the era of binding targets.
But here's the twist, and it's a big one. It didn't bind everybody.
No, it did not. It was built on a core philosophy that you see woven through all of these climate documents, a phrase you have to understand: common but differentiated responsibilities.
Common but differentiated responsibilities. That sounds like some high-level diplomatic jargon for it's complicated.
It is, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. You could translate it as, you broke it, you bought it.
Ah, I like that better.
The argument, which was pushed very hard by developing countries, was that the developed world, the Annex I countries like the US, the UK, Japan, Germany, were overwhelmingly responsible for the current high levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Because they'd had a 150-year head start on industrialization. They'd been burning coal and oil since the 19th century to build their wealth.
Precisely. The logic was you got rich by polluting for over a century, so you have the primary responsibility and the financial capacity to lead the cleanup effort.
Meanwhile, you had developing nations like India and China at the time who were just beginning their major economic growth. They argued that putting limits on them would be like kicking the ladder out from under them.
Exactly. So under the Kyoto Protocol, developing nations, including major players like China, India, and Brazil, got a pass. No binding emissions targets for them.
And the binding targets for the developed world, what were they?
The overall target was an average 5% reduction in emissions compared to 1990 levels, to be achieved in the first commitment period of 2008 to 2012.
You know, hearing 5% now sounds almost laughably modest when we're talking about needing to get to net zero.
It seems tiny now, but at the time it was a massive political lift. It was politically toxic in some countries, especially the United States, where the Senate voted 95-0 against ratifying any treaty that didn't include developing countries. The U.S. signed it, but never ratified it.
So it was controversial from the start. But you argue that the real lasting legacy of Kyoto isn't the 5% number. It's the mechanisms they created.
That's the key insight. Forget the target for a second. The truly revolutionary thing Kyoto did was that it turned pollution into a commodity. It created a market for the right to emit carbon dioxide.
This is the birth of the carbon market.
The flexible mechanisms. This was the beating heart of Kyoto. The first and most famous one was emissions trading, or cap-and-trade.
Okay, break that down for us. How does cap and trade work?
It's actually quite elegant. The UN effectively puts a total cap on the emissions of all the developed countries combined. Then it divides up that cap and gives each country an allowance, a certain number of permits to pollute.
So it's like a pollution budget.
A perfect analogy. Now, let's say Germany invests heavily in wind power, and they end up using only 90% of their pollution budget. They have 10% left over.
Okay.
Meanwhile, let's say another country is struggling to meet its target. They're going to exceed their budget. Under the system, Germany can sell its leftover permits to that other country.
Ah, so efficiency becomes a valuable asset you can sell. If I'm cleaner than required, I can actually make money by selling my virtue to someone who's dirtier.
Precisely. Carbon became a tradable asset, a currency. It created a financial incentive to cut emissions even faster than required. But they didn't stop there. They took it a step further with something called the Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM.
The CDM. This one always seemed a bit strange to me.
It's fascinating. It was the first global environmental investment and credit scheme of its kind. It allowed a developed country, let's stick with Germany, to meet its Kyoto target by investing in an emission reduction project in a developing country.
So Germany could pay to build a solar farm in India, for example.
Exactly. And the emissions reductions from that solar farm in India would generate credits called Certified Emission Reductions, or CERs. Germany could then buy those credits and count them towards its own national target.
That feels a bit like outsourcing your diet. You pay someone else to eat a salad for you, and you get to count it as weight loss.
It's a common criticism, for sure, but the logic from a climate perspective was, look, the atmosphere is a global commons. It doesn't care if a ton of CO2 is reduced in Dusseldorf or in Delhi. A ton is a ton.
And the upside was that it created a mechanism to funnel billions of dollars of investment and clean technology from the rich world to the developing world.
That was the goal. It was a win-win on paper. And there was a third mechanism, joint implementation, which was basically the same thing, but between two developed countries.
Okay, so Kyoto runs its course. The first commitment period ends in 2012. And then what?
Well, they realized they needed a bridge to whatever came next. So at COP18 in Doha in 2012, they passed the Doha Amendment, which created a second commitment period for Kyoto, running from 2013 to 2020. But by then, the world was a very different place.
How so?
The developed versus developing firewall that Kyoto was built on was starting to crumble. By the late 2000s, China had overtaken the U.S. as the world's largest annual emitter. India's emissions were rising fast.
So the idea that only the old, established Western powers should have binding targets was becoming politically and environmentally obsolete.
Completely. You couldn't solve the problem anymore by just focusing on Europe and North America. You needed a new deal, a deal that included everyone.
And the road to that new deal was pretty bumpy. I distinctly remember the drama around Copenhagen, COP15 in 2009. That was hyped as the big one, the moment we'd save the world.
It was. The expectations were astronomical, and it was a spectacular failure, at least in terms of producing a legally binding treaty.
What went wrong?
They tried to use the old top-down model. A few powerful countries tried to hash out a deal and impose it on everyone else, and the negotiations just completely collapsed. Developing countries felt their sovereignty was being ignored, and developed countries refused to carry the financial burden alone. It was a mess.
And they ended up with the Copenhagen Accord.
Which was just a non-binding political declaration. It did introduce the goal of limiting temperature rise to 2 degrees Celsius, which was important, but it had no legal force. It really felt like the entire UN process was on the verge of falling apart.
So how did they recover from that? How did they get from the failure of Copenhagen to the success of Paris?
They learned a crucial lesson. They realized the top-down approach, the UN commands you to cut X%, was dead. They needed to flip the script.
They shifted to a bottom-up approach.
Exactly. I love your analogy from before. The potluck dinner strategy. Instead of the host dictating the menu, you asked everyone to bring a dish that they're able and willing to cook.
And this new idea started to take shape at COP19 in Warsaw in 2013.
That's right. They introduced a new concept with a clunky new acronym, INDCs, Intended Nationally Determined Contributions.
Which is just a fancy way of saying, you tell us what you're prepared to do.
That's all it is. Every country goes home, looks at their own national circumstances, their economy, their politics, their technological capabilities, and they come back with their own pledge. It's like writing your own homework assignment.
And that voluntary bottom-up approach is what paved the way for Paris.
It was the absolute key. It led directly to COP21 in Paris 2015, the breakthrough moment. For the very first time, they managed to bring all nations, developed and developing alike, into a single common cause.
What was it about Paris that made it stick when Copenhagen had failed so miserably?
It was the genius of the NDC structure.
Yeah.
Because countries set their own targets, they had ownership of them, they weren't being dictated to by an outside body, it respected national sovereignty.
But the agreement itself did have binding elements, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just a free-for-all.
Yes. While the targets themselves are voluntary, the process is legally binding. And the most important part of that process is the ratchet mechanism.
The ratchet mechanism sounds like a tool.
It is a tool for increasing ambition over time. See, the central goal of the Paris Agreement is to hold the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees.
And everyone knew that the first round of pledges, the first INDCs, weren't nearly enough to get there.
Not even close. If you added them all up, they still led to catastrophic warming. So Paris built in a global stocktake. Every 5 years, starting in 2023, the entire world gets back together to assess our collective progress against the goals.
It's like a global report card.
Exactly. And the rule is, when you come back with your next pledge for the following 5 years, it has to be more ambitious than your last one. You can't go backwards.
You can't show up and say, actually, you know what, we're going to pollute more now.
No. The ratchet is only designed to click in one direction, towards greater ambition. It creates this 5-year cycle that is supposed to drive emissions down over time.
Paris also set up a successor to Kyoto's market mechanisms, right?
It did in Article 6. It's designed to allow for voluntary cooperation between countries to meet their NDCs, including through the use of carbon markets. But the rules for that were so complex, they took another 6 years to negotiate.
So Paris was a grand agreement, but they still had to write the instruction manual.
That's what all the subsequent COPs have been about, really. Marrakech, COP22, was all about starting to write the Paris rulebook. How do you report emissions? How does the stocktake work? All the technical details.
Then there was COP23 in Bonn, which was co-hosted by Fiji. I remember that one introduced the Talanoa dialogue.
That was a really interesting innovation. Talanoa is a traditional Pacific concept of dialogue. It's about sharing stories in an inclusive, transparent way to build empathy and make wise decisions.
So they tried to get away from just arguing over legal text in brackets.
They did. It was an attempt to build trust and understanding by having countries share their experiences with climate impacts and their ideas for solutions. That was also where the Powering Past Coal Alliance was launched.
Then Katowice, Glasgow. Glasgow COP26 felt like a big one. The coal COP.
A huge milestone. It was the first time ever that a final UN climate agreement text explicitly mentioned fossil fuels, specifically the phase down of unabated coal.
Phase down, not phase out. I remember the last-minute drama over that one word.
A massive fight. The original text said phase out, but India and China, among others, pushed back hard at the 11th hour and it was changed to phase down. But still, just getting the word coal into the document was seen as a historic breakthrough.
Glasgow also finally finalized the rulebook for Article 6, the carbon markets piece.
Yes, after years of deadlock. And then most recently, we had Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27, which really pivoted towards the issue of climate justice, loss and damage. This was the central issue. For years, vulnerable developing nations have been arguing that they are already suffering irreversible losses and damages from a crisis they did very little to cause.
This isn't about adaptation anymore. This isn't building a seawall. This is your country disappearing under the waves.
Or your farmland turning to desert. It's the impacts you can no longer adapt to. They argued for compensation. Essentially, you crashed my car, you pay for the damages fund. And after decades of resistance from developed countries, they finally got it. The fund was established.
That feels like a perfect transition to our next big topic, money. Because none of this, not the treaties, not the technology, happens for free. What is the financial architecture that underpins this whole system?
It's a complex and, frankly, often confusing web of different funds and mechanisms. But the core principle is the one enshrined in the original convention. Developed countries should provide financial resources to assist developing countries with both mitigation and adaptation.
Okay, so who are the main players? The big piggy banks.
Well, the oldest one is the GEF, the Global Environment Facility. It's been around since before the Rio Summit, and it serves as a financial mechanism for several environmental conventions, not just climate. It funds projects on biodiversity, land degradation, you name it.
But the new heavyweight champion is the GCF.
The Green Climate Fund, exactly. The GCF was established at COP16 in Cancun in 2010. This is supposed to be the main vehicle for channeling the massive flows of climate finance. It's the operating entity that's supposed to help achieve that big headline goal of mobilizing $100 billion a year.
Right, the $100 billion a year promise from developed to developing countries. How are they doing on that, by the way?
They have been historically slow to meet the target. It's been a major point of contention and mistrust. But the structure, the GCF, is there, and it's starting to move significant amounts of money for both mitigation projects like renewable energy and adaptation projects like early warning systems for storms.
In the notes, I was really struck by the funding source for something called the Adaptation Fund. It's very clever.
Isn't it? This is a great example of connecting the different parts of the system. Remember the clean development mechanism under Kyoto? The carbon trading scheme.
Yeah.
The Adaptation Fund is primarily financed by a 2% levy on the proceeds from all CDM projects. So every time a carbon credit is issued and treated under that scheme, a small tax is skimmed off the top.
That tax money goes directly to fund concrete adaptation projects like new irrigation techniques or coastal protection in the most vulnerable developing countries.
It's a perfect closed loop. The market mechanism that was designed to reduce emissions also helps pay for the consequences of the emissions that are already in the atmosphere.
That's brilliant. Are there any other major funds we should know about?
There are a few others, like the Special Climate Change Fund and the Least Developed Countries Fund, which provide very targeted support. And then you have the multilateral development banks and a separate set of funds called the Climate Investment Funds, or CIFs, which run things like the Clean Technology Fund to help scale up low-carbon tech. It's a whole ecosystem of finance.
Well, let's talk about what this money actually buys.
Yeah.
Let's move on to some of the specific mechanisms for mitigation and adaptation. One of the biggest and I think most interesting concepts in the conservation world is REDD plus MES.
REDD and REDD plus math. The first thing to know is what it stands for, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation.
The logic here seems pretty straightforward.
It's incredibly simple and powerful. Trees are basically giant sponges for carbon. They suck CO2 out of the atmosphere to build their trunks, their branches, their leaves. When you cut down and burn a forest, you're not just losing the sponge.
You're squeezing all the carbon it has stored for decades or centuries right back into the atmosphere. Deforestation is a huge source of emissions.
A massive source. So NBND was created as a mechanism to pay developing countries to not cut down their forests, to leave the axe in the shed.
But then they added a plus to it. What's the plus in REDD plus a burn?
The plus expands the concept beyond just avoiding deforestation. It includes the role of conservation, the sustainable management of forests, and crucially, the enhancement of forest carbon stocks.
Enhancement means planting more trees. Reforestation.
Yes, but also active management to make existing forests healthier and more carbon dense. So RDD Plus isn't just about don't cut, it's a holistic approach to forest management.
And economically, the idea is to create a system where a standing, living tree is worth more financially than a dead tree sold for timber.
That's the entire game. You create a financial value for the carbon that is stored in the forest. India has a massive stake in this with its Green India mission. The documents say they're aiming to use forest enhancement to capture an additional 1 billion tons of CO2. It's a huge potential mitigation tool.
Okay, from forests to farms, we all have to eat. But agriculture, with everything from livestock to fertilizer, is a major source of greenhouse gases.
A huge source. But it's also uniquely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So this is where the concept of climate-smart agriculture, or CSA, comes in.
The sources referred to CSA as a triple win. What are the three wins?
Okay, win number one is productivity. We have a growing global population. We need to produce more food. So any new system has to sustainably increase agricultural yields. That's food security.
Makes sense. Win number two.
Win number two is resilience. The climate is already getting more chaotic. Farmers are dealing with more intense droughts, floods, and heat waves. CSA aims to make farms and farming systems more resilient to these shocks. That's the adaptation piece.
And the third win?
Mitigation. Agriculture needs to reduce its own emissions footprint. This could mean reducing methane from livestock, using fertilizer more efficiently, or turning farmland into a carbon sink.
Can you really do all three of those at the same time? I mean, often higher yields come from using more nitrogen fertilizer, which creates nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas.
It's a huge challenge, but it is possible with the right techniques. Let's take an example, conservation tillage or no-till farming.
Okay.
Traditionally, farmers plow their fields, which turns the soil over. But when you do that, you expose all the organic matter in the soil to oxygen. It oxidizes and is released into the atmosphere as CO2.
I see.
With no-till farming, you leave the soil undisturbed, the carbon stays locked in the ground. That's a huge mitigation win.
And how does that help with the other two wins?
Well, soil that is rich in carbon and organic matter acts like a sponge. It holds water much more effectively. So when a drought comes, a no-till farm is more resilient. That's the resilience win. And that same healthy soil also holds nutrients better, which leads to better crop growth. That's the productivity win.
Triple win. It all connects.
It all connects. This all fits into the much broader concept that you hear a lot about, the green economy.
The green economy. It feels like one of those terms that means a lot of different things to different people. How do the official sources define it?
The standard UN definition is an economy that results in improved human well-being and social equity, while significantly reducing environmental risks and ecological scarcities.
So it's not just about building solar panels. It's also about justice and well-being.
Exactly. It's about a just transition. You can't just shut down a country's coal industry overnight and tell a million miners good luck. That's not a green economy. A green economy involves investing in retraining, creating new clean energy jobs, and ensuring that the communities that powered the old economy aren't left behind.
Okay, so we've covered the diplomats, the bankers, the foresters, and the farmers. Before we finally get to the engineers and the hardware, let's briefly touch on the accountants of this whole system, the science that underpins all the policy.
Right, and we have to circle back to the IPCC just to hammer this home. The IPCC's role is to assess the science. They provide the fundamental shared baseline of reality that all 197 countries can then negotiate from.
And we've seen their work evolve, from the first assessment report AR1 in 1990, all the way to AR6, which came out in 2021 and 2022.
And with each report, the language has become stronger and more certain, and the window of time we have left to act has become terrifyingly smaller.
But who actually counts the carbon? When a country stands up at a COP and says, we've reduced our emissions by 10% since last year, how do we know they're not just making that number up?
That is the critical and perhaps unglamorous job of the NGGIP.
The National Greenhouse Gas Inventories Program. That sounds like the driest job on Earth.
It might be dry, but it is the absolute foundation of trust in the entire system. The NGGIP is run by the IPCC, and their job is to develop and refine the standardized methodology for counting carbon.
So they write the instruction manual for how every country has to estimate and report their emissions.
Yes, so that when China reports a ton of CO2 and the United States reports a ton of CO2, we know they were counted in the same way. Without that comparability, the Paris Agreement would instantly crumble because nobody would trust anyone else's data. They are, in a very real sense, the auditors of the apocalypse.
Okay, the software is now fully mapped out. The treaties, the finance, the rules, the science. Now let's get our hands dirty with the hardware. Section 7, the technological solutions.
Finally, the fun part, the renewable mandate. At its core, this is a shift from using secondary energy sources like burning coal to make steam to make electricity to using primary sources.
Sources that are continuously replenished by nature. The light from the sun, the movement of the wind, the heat from the Earth's core, the pull of the tides.
Exactly, and the scale of ambition here is just breathtaking. Look at India's targets in these documents. 175 gigawatts of renewables by 2022, and a new goal of 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy capacity by 2030.
Put 500 gigawatts in perspective for us.
1 gigawatt is roughly the output of a very large nuclear or coal power plant. It's enough to power a mid-sized city. So India is planning to build the equivalent of 500 large, clean power plants in less than a decade. The scale is staggering.
So let's deep dive into the biggest one first.
Yeah.
Solar. We all see the black rectangles on people's roofs. How do they actually work? I mean, on a fundamental physics level.
It's basically quantum physics happening in a silicon wafer on your roof. The whole thing works because of something called the photoelectric effect. Fun fact, Einstein won his Nobel Prize for explaining this effect, not for relativity.
No way. Okay, so how does it work?
You start with a sandwich of semiconductor material, usually silicon. One layer is doped with impurities to give it a positive charge, and the other layer is doped to have a negative charge. This creates an electric field in the middle.
Okay, a silicon sandwich with an electric field.
Now imagine a photon, a tiny particle of light from the sun traveling 93 million miles and then smashing into an atom in that silicon sandwich.
It's like a game of billiards on an atomic scale.
That is a perfect analogy. The photon is the cue ball. It hits an electron in the silicon atom and knocks it loose.
And what happens to that loose electron?
Because of that electric field we mentioned, that newly freed electron is forced to travel in one direction. And a steady flow of electrons in one direction is, by definition, an electric current. Specifically, it's direct current, or DC.
Which we then have to run through an inverter to turn it into the alternating current, AC, that comes out of our wall sockets.
That's the whole process. That's photovoltaics, or PV, but that's not the only way to make electricity from the sun.
Right. There's also concentrated solar power, or CSP. This is the one with all the mirrors, right?
Yeah.
The giant sci-fi looking arrays in the desert.
Yes. CSP is a completely different approach. It's actually much more like a traditional power plant. It's basically a steam engine powered by the sun.
How does that work?
Instead of using panels, you use huge fields of curved mirrors called parabolic troughs to focus a vast amount of sunlight onto a very small area, usually a tube filled with a fluid like a special oil or, in more advanced plants, molten salt.
You're using the mirrors like a magnifying glass to burn a leaf.
Exactly like that. But on an industrial scale, you heat this fluid up to an incredibly high temperature, hundreds of degrees Celsius. That superheated fluid is then used to boil water, which creates high-pressure steam.
And that steam spins a turbine, which spins a generator, just like in a coal plant.
Precisely. The only difference is your heat source is the sun, not burning coal.
So why would you go through all that trouble with mirrors and steam when you could just use simple PV panels?
One huge advantage, energy storage. You can store that super hot molten salt in a giant insulated tank. It can stay hot for many hours after the sun is set.
So you can keep generating electricity at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night?
You can. A standard TV panel stops working the second the sun goes down. A CSP plant with storage can provide power on demand, which is incredibly valuable for grid stability.
The notes also mention a potential future tech called luminescent solar concentrators, LSCs. What are those?
This is a really cool idea, especially for cities.
Yeah.
Imagine a window pane, a sheet of glass or plastic that glows faintly around the edges.
Okay.
That pane is embedded with special fluorescent dyes or quantum dots. When sunlight hits the face of the window, these dyes absorb it and then re-emit it as light of a different color. But that re-emitted light gets trapped inside the glass, bouncing back and forth until it reaches the frame.
And what's at the frame?
Along the edges of the window, you have tiny, very efficient solar cells. They don't need to cover the whole window, just the edges to collect all that concentrated light.
So every window in a skyscraper could become a transparent power generator.
That's the dream. And the best part is they work really well even in diffuse light on cloudy days, which is a major weakness for traditional panels. They could be a game changer for integrating solar into the urban environment.
Speaking of global integration, let's connect the physics back to the politics with the International Solar Alliance.
The ISA. This is a fascinating geopolitical and economic initiative. It was launched at COP21 in Paris, championed by India and France.
And the core idea is based on geography, right?
It is. They realized that most of the countries with the best solar resources, the ones lying between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, are also developing countries. They dubbed them the sunshine countries.
What's the goal of the alliance? Is it like OPEC for solar power?
In a positive, constructive way, yes. The primary goal is to aggregate demand to drive down costs. Instead of a small African nation trying to buy 5,000 solar panels and paying a high retail price, the alliance can go to manufacturers and say, we want to place a bulk order for 500 million panels on behalf of our member countries. What's your best price?
So they use collective bargaining power to make solar cheaper for everyone.
Exactly. And also to standardize technology and promote research and development. It's a huge deal. And its headquarters are in Gurgaon, India, the first international treaty-based organization to be headquartered there.
And out of this alliance comes this incredibly ambitious, almost sci-fi concept, Osawag.
One sun, one world, one grid.
It sounds like the slogan for a global supervillain.
It does, but it's actually a brilliant engineering concept. The core idea is that the sun never sets on planet Earth as a whole.
Right. When it's midnight in Mumbai, the sun is blazing in Mexico City.
So what if you connected the world's power grids with massive, high-voltage, long-distance transmission lines? When India's solar farms go offline at night, they could import solar power generated in, say, Morocco, where it's still daytime. Then a few hours later, they could export their morning power to Japan.
You would be literally shipping sunshine around the globe. It would smooth out the biggest problem with solar, which is its intermittency.
It's the ultimate solution to intermittency. A globally interconnected grid would be like one giant power plant that never turns off.
That is an incredible vision. Okay, let's pivot from the sun to the wind. I always thought wind turbines were pretty simple. Wind blows, blades spin, power is made. But the physics section in the notes, especially something called the cube law, just blew my mind.
This is the single most important non-intuitive thing to understand about wind energy. The amount of power a turbine can generate is not linearly related to the wind speed. It is a cubic relationship.
Okay, you have to break that down for us.
Let's say you have a wind blowing at 10 miles per hour. That gives you X amount of power. Now, if the wind speed doubles to 20 miles per hour, your intuition says you should get double the power, right? 2x.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But you don't. You get 8 times the power. 2 cubed, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8.
Whoa! So a small increase in average wind speed results in a massive increase in power generation.
A massive exponential increase. This is why wind farm developers are so incredibly picky about where they site their turbines. A location with an average wind speed of 15 mph is exponentially better than one with 13 mph. It's a completely different ballgame.
And this explains the massive push towards offshore wind.
It's the entire reason for it. Building turbines in the ocean is a complete nightmare. It's expensive, salt water corrodes everything, maintenance is a logistical horror show. But
the winds at sea are stronger and more consistent than on land.
exactly. And because of the cube law, that slightly higher average wind speed more than pays for all the extra cost and difficulty. The power output is just so much greater.
The notes mention there's another multiplier in the equation, too, related to the size of the blades.
Yes, the power is also proportional to the sweep area of the blades, the area of the circle they trace. And the area of the circle is proportional to the square of its radius.
So if you double the length of the turbine blade,
You quadruple the sweep area, and you get 4 times the power. This is why we're seeing this relentless race to build bigger and bigger turbines. We're seeing offshore turbines now with blades longer than a football field. It's not an ego contest, it's pure physics. Longer blades and faster wind are the 2 keys to the kingdom.
and there's a third smaller factor, too, right? Air density.
There is. Denser, heavier air provides more lift on the blades, just like on an airplane wing. So cold sea level air is actually better for wind power than thin, warm, high-altitude air. All these factors go into finding the perfect spot.
Okay, so let's try to bring this entire massive deep dive together. We started with the political will, forged in these international agreements like the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement.
Right, that's the will, the decision to act.
Then we talked about the financial architecture, the GCF, the carbon markets, which provide the way to pay for this transition.
The way, the economic engine.
And finally, we've explored the technological solutions, the physics of silicon wafers, and the aerodynamics of turbine blades, which provide the how.
The will, the way, and the how. It's a 3-legged stool. You can't have one without the others. If you take away the finance, the tech is too expensive for most of the world to adopt.
And if you take away the treaties, there's no long-term policy certainty, so no one will make the massive financial investments needed to scale up the tech.
They all reinforce each other in a virtuous cycle. Or, if one leg breaks, the whole thing can collapse.
It feels like the sources lay out a clear path, but also a frantic one. The technology seems to be moving at an exponential pace, driven by these incredible physical laws like the cube law and the economics of manufacturing scale. But the politics.
The politics is linear at best. It moves in fits and starts. A negotiation takes years, an election can derail everything. But the atmosphere doesn't care about our election cycles. It operates on the laws of physics, which are non-negotiable.
That really is the central tension, isn't it? The race we're in, we clearly have the tools, we theoretically have the money, but the clock of atmospheric physics is ticking relentlessly.
It's a race between the exponential curve of innovation and the incredible inertia of our political and economic systems.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on. We've talked about the physics of wind, that incredible cube law. We've talked about the economics of solar and the ISA's mission to drive costs down exponentially. The question is, are our political timelines, our 5-year NDC cycles under the Paris Agreement, actually aligned with the exponential potential of that technology?
Or are our political goals, which feel so ambitious to us, still lagging far behind what is actually possible if we just unleash the engineers in the markets? That is the question. At the end of the day, are we truly limited by the laws of physics, or are we just limited by the laws of Parliament?
Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Stay curious.
At this stage, it is important to understand the ecological relationship involved. Because when we look at the world around us, we tend to see separate things. We see a farm, we see a forest, we see a city, a river. But the reality, as we're going to find out today, is that these aren't separate snapshots. They're part of a massive, breathing, interconnected web.
Precisely. And I think the mistake we often make, whether we are policymakers or, just people trying to understand the news, is that we try to fix these things in isolation.
Right, you put them in silos.
Exactly. We try to fix pollution without looking at farming. Or we try to save a specific animal without looking at the soil chemistry. But if you pull on one thread, say, the quality of the soil under your feet, you eventually shake the whole web.
And it impacts everything.
Everything. From global climate treaties to the migratory patterns of birds halfway across the world.
So we're going to do something a bit different today. We're going to build this world from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Literally. We're starting with the ground beneath our feet and working our way up to the atmosphere.
It's the only way to see the full picture.
And I have to say, looking at the research we have here, calling this stuff on the ground dirt feels like a massive insult.
It really is. I always tell people, dirt is what you find under your fingernails. Soil is the skin of the earth. It's a living entity.
It's a natural body.
A natural body, yes, composed of mineral and organic constituents. It has structure, it has history, and it has layers. In fact, if you were to take a backhoe and slice a section of the earth vertically right down into the ground, you would see a very specific architecture. We call that the soil profile.
I was looking at the diagrams in the notes, and honestly, it looks less like a random pile of mud and more like a layer cake. Or maybe an archaeological dig. You have these very distinct bands, technically called horizons, and each one seems to tell a different chemical story.
A very different story. Each one performs a different function.
So let's grab a metaphorical shovel and start digging. We are standing in a forest, we look down. What is the very first thing we see?
Before you even hit what you would consider Earth, you are standing on the O horizon. The O stands for organic.
This is the leaf litter, right? The stuff that crunches when you walk, the twigs, the fallen branches.
Exactly. But it's not just dead leaves sitting there doing nothing. It's a bustling factory. This layer is fresh organic matter, fallen leaves, twigs, animal waste, dead insects. That is in various stages of decomposition.
So it's constantly changing.
Constantly. If you've ever walked in a damp, old-growth forest and smelled that rich, earthy, musky smell.
Oh, yeah, that deep, damp smell. It smells like it smells healthy.
That is the smell of the O horizon at work. It is biologically the most active layer. You have fungi, bacteria, and tiny invertebrates breaking down that debris. They are the recyclers. They are turning death back into nutrients.
So this is the forest's self-fertilizing system.
That's a perfect way to put it. But here's the catch. If you walk onto a modern industrial farm, you usually won't find an O horizon.
Really? Why not? It seems so essential.
Because in conventional agriculture, we plow it under. Or we harvest the biomass, the stalks and stems, and take it off the field. So the O horizon is mostly a feature of natural, undisturbed ecosystems like forests.
Okay, so let's say we sweep away the leaves. Now we are hitting the actual dirt, the dark stuff. This must be the A horizon.
This is topsoil. And for human civilization, this is arguably the most valuable substance on the planet.
That sounds like hyperbole. More valuable than gold or oil.
You can't eat gold, and you can't grow food in rock. The A horizon is a mixture of mineral particles, sand, silt, clay, but it is stained dark by humus.
Humus, that's a word we hear a lot. What is it exactly? Is it the same as compost?
It's related, but not quite. Humus is fully decomposed organic matter. It's stable. It's the end product of all that activity in the O horizon. It's this complex, spongy, carbon-rich substance that holds water and nutrients like nothing else.
So that's what makes the topsoil so dark and rich.
Exactly. This is where the magic happens. It's where the roots feed, where the bacteria fix nitrogen, where the water is held. If a civilization loses its A horizon, it collapses. Historically, that is not an exaggeration. Look at the Dust Bowl in the United States.
That was a man-made ecological disaster based on losing the topsoil.
Entirely. They plowed up the native prairie, which had a deep A horizon, and when the drought came, it just blew away.
So this is the zone of life. But as we dig deeper, the color changes. In the diagrams, the next layer looks pale, almost washed out. This is the E horizon.
The E stands for eluviated, But in plain English, think of it as the zone of leaching.
Leaching is a word we hear a lot, but let's unpack the physics of it. What is actually happening there?
Imagine you have a filter full of coffee grounds and you pour hot water over it. The water moves through, capturing the color, the flavor, and the chemicals and carries them down into the pot.
And the grounds left behind are paler and spent.
That is leaching. In the soil, rainwater picks up organic acids from that O horizon we talked about, and as it trickles down through the E horizon, it acts like a weak acid. It strips away minerals like iron and aluminum.
It strips them away, so it's actively robbing this layer.
Yes. It dissolves them and carries them downward. So what is left behind in the E horizon is mostly resistant materials, like quartz, sand, and silt. That's why it looks bleached or gray. It's the layer that has been robbed of its riches by the water passing through.
That is surprisingly dramatic for dirt. So if the E horizon is the victim of the robbery, where does the loot go? The minerals have to end up somewhere.
They end up in the B horizon, or the subsoil. This
Yeah.
is the zone of accumulation.
So it's like a bank vault.
A bank vault is a good way to think of it. All those minerals, the iron, the aluminum, the clay that washed out of the E layer, get deposited here. This layer is often denser, harder, and more colorful, usually reddish or yellowish because of the iron oxides accumulating there.
Is that a good thing for a plant's roots, to hit this dense layer?
It can be a problem. Sometimes it's so dense it forms a hardpan that roots can't penetrate. It can also cause waterlogging because the water can't drain through it easily.
So the plant effectively drowns.
It can, yes. The subsoil is crucial for a lot of reasons, but it's not the primary zone for growth like the topsoil is.
And below that, we're getting deeper now.
Below that is the C horizon, which is the parent material. It's basically weathered or broken down rock that hasn't really turned into soil yet. It's the raw ingredient.
The quarry.
The quarry, exactly. And finally, the R horizon, which is the solid bedrock, the foundation of the continent, unweathered rock.
So if you're a farmer or even a gardener, you are obsessing over that top layer, the A horizon. But it's not just about having the layer, it's about the texture. I kept seeing this term loam in the source material. The sources make loam sound like the holy grail of soil. Why is everyone chasing loam?
Soil texture is strictly defined by the relative proportion of three particle sizes: sand, silt, and clay. Sand is the big, gritty particle. Clay is the microscopic, sticky particle. Silt is in between.
And each has a fatal flaw, right?
Exactly. Think about a bucket of pure sand, like at the beach. You pour water in and what happens?
It runs right at the bottom. It's a sieve. It has zero water holding capacity.
Right, so plants die of thirst. Now think about a bucket of pure clay. You pour water on it and it just sits on top. When it finally soaks in, it packs together incredibly tight. It holds water so well that it becomes a muddy, suffocating brick when it's wet and an actual brick when it's dry.
So roots can't penetrate it and air can't get in, the plants drown or suffocate?
Precisely. Enter loam. Loam is the Goldilocks texture. It is a roughly even mix of sand, silt, and clay. It has the sand to provide drainage and airflow, but enough clay and silt to hold onto moisture and nutrients.
So it's the best of all worlds.
It creates a crumbly structure that is the ideal medium for the cultivation of almost every major crop. It holds water, but it doesn't drown the roots. It's friable, meaning it's easy to work with. It is, quite simply, perfect soil.
But here is the problem, and this is where the ecological crisis begins to creep in. We are losing it. Soil erosion. And I think when most people hear erosion, they think of wind blowing dust around. But the breakdown of how erosion happens in the notes is actually incredibly violent. It starts with a bomb.
It does. It starts with splash erosion. We completely underestimate the power of a single raindrop.
It seems so gentle.
But when a raindrop hits bare soil, it is traveling at terminal velocity. We're talking up to 20 miles per hour. If there is no leaf litter or vegetation to break the fall, that drop hits the earth like a miniature bomb.
The notes mentioned explosive impact.
It creates a tiny crater. It blasts soil particles into the air, sometimes up to 2 feet high and 5 feet away. But more importantly, it destroys the soil structure.
Try to do that.
Well, soil isn't just loose dust. It's held together in little clumps called aggregates by fungal glues and organic matter. The rain bomb shatters those aggregates. It turns the surface into a muddy slurry, which then dries and forms a crust.
And that crust seals the soil.
It seals the surface of the soil so water can't soak in.
And if the water can't soak in, it has to run off.
Exactly. And that leads to sheet erosion. This is the most deceptive form of erosion because it's almost invisible. It's where a thin, uniform layer of that precious topsoil is peeled off the entire field by the flowing water.
You wouldn't even notice it day to day.
You might not notice it happening year to year. It's like losing your hair. You don't notice it day by day until suddenly you realize the coverage is gone. A farmer might just think their yields are getting a little worse each year, not realizing they're recrassing. A horizon is washing into the nearest river.
And if you let that keep going, if you don't stop the runoff,
Then the water starts to organize. It finds the path of least resistance. It forms tiny channels called rills. You can still drive a tractor over them, but you can see them. And as those rills get deeper and wider with each rainfall,
they turn into gully erosion.
gullies. These are deep gashes in the land. We are talking channels so deep that a tractor cannot cross them. At this point, the land is effectively destroyed for agriculture. It's a physical scar on the landscape that can take centuries or even millennia to heal naturally.
There's another villain in this story, too, which connects to how we manage water. Salt. We usually think of salt as something we sprinkle on food, but in the context of soil, it's a killer. The notes talk about saline soils and something called capillary rise.
Saline soils are a major tragedy, often in arid and semi-arid regions where a lot of our food is grown. It happens when you have a high accumulation of water-soluble salts in the soil.
And this can happen naturally.
It can be natural, but often it's human-induced through bad irrigation. This is a huge problem in places like Central Asia or parts of California.
Wait, how does watering crops make the soil salty? Fresh water isn't salty.
All water, even fresh river water, has some dissolved salts in it. It's a tiny amount, but it's there. Now, here's the mechanism. Imagine you flood a field in a hot desert climate. The plants use some of the water, but a huge amount just evaporates rapidly into the air because of the sun.
But salt doesn't evaporate.
Salt does not evaporate. It stays behind. Year after year, irrigation cycle after irrigation cycle, that salt builds up. It's like adding a tiny pinch of salt to a bowl every day for 100 years. Eventually, the bowl is full of salt.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about this capillary rise? That sounds like physics.
It is physics. Think about dipping the corner of a paper towel into a glass of water. The water climbs up the towel against gravity.
Right, it wicks up.
That is capillary action. Soil has tiny pores that act just like that paper towel. If you have a salty groundwater table that is too close to the surface, often caused by over-irrigating and raising the water table, the water wicks up through the soil, pours to the surface.
And then it evaporates.
And it leaves a white, crusty layer of salt on top. It literally poisons the land. Plants can't drink that water. The osmotic pressure is too high. It actually pulls water out of their roots. They wither and die even when standing in moist soil.
So we have this delicate skin of the earth, the soil, that we are constantly threatening with erosion and salinity. But humans are ingenious. We've developed incredibly complex ways to grow food within these systems. I want to shift gears to cropping patterns because the notes here show that farming is basically geometry and timing.
It's absolute geometry. We have moved far beyond just throwing seeds on the ground and hoping for the best. To understand sustainable farming, you have to look at the architecture of the field.
Let's start with the one most people know, monoculture.
Monoculture is growing the same crop on the same land year after year, or maybe rotating between just two, like corn and soy.
Which is incredibly efficient for machines. If you have a machine that harvests corn, you want 1,000 acres of just corn.
Efficient for machines, but terrible for the ecosystem. It drains specific nutrients because corn always needs the same thing. It invites pests and diseases because you're creating an all-you-can-eat buffet for the corn borer moth.
And the soil is left bare for months between harvest and planting.
Which is a perfect recipe for that sheet and gully erosion we just talked about.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative, or one of them, is intercropping. This is growing 2 or more crops simultaneously on the same field with a distinct row arrangement. And the variations here are brilliant.
My favorite one mentioned in the text is multi-story cropping. It sounds like an apartment building for plants.
That is a perfect analogy. It's about using vertical space. In a natural forest, you have a canopy, an understory, and a forest floor, all catching sunlight at different levels. Multi-story cropping mimics that. You see this often in tropical plantation crops.
Give us the visual. What does this look like?
Okay, picture this. You look up and you see tall coconut trees or areca nuts dominating the skyline. They love full sun. Now look at their trunks. Climbing up those trunks, using them as support, are pepper vines. They need something to climb.
Okay, so that's the second floor,
Yeah.
using the first floor for support.
Then in the dabbled shade underneath the coconuts, you plant cocoa or coffee. They don't like harsh, direct sun. They like that filtered light. They'd get scorched otherwise.
And the ground floor?
On the ground floor and the spaces between, you grow pineapples or ginger or turmeric. They are perfectly happy in the shade.
Coconut, pepper, cocoa, pineapple. That's not a farm, that's a fruit salad waiting to happen. But the efficiency is incredible. You're capturing sunlight at every level.
And you're protecting the soil. Remember splash erosion. The rain doesn't hit the ground with that bomb force because it hits 3 layers of leaves first. It drips down gently. The soil stays intact. You're also creating a diverse habitat for beneficial insects.
There's also alley cropping. This one sounds a bit more structured, more linear.
Yeah, it is. Alley cropping is where you grow food crops in alleys formed by hedgerows of trees or shrubs, often nitrogen-fixing trees like leucaena.
So what do the trees do?
They do a lot. The trees act as windbreaks, preventing wind erosion. Their roots hold the soil and prevent water erosion. And the farmers prune the trees regularly, using the leaves as mulch or green manure to feed the crops in the alleys.
So the trees are a fence, a structure, and a fertilizer factory all in one.
Exactly. And they can provide another product like timber or fruit. It's a much more resilient system.
And then there's the timing aspect. Relay intercropping. It sounds like a track and field race.
That's exactly what it is. It's the baton pass. In standard farming, you harvest one crop, leave the field bare, and then plant the next. In relay cropping, you plant the second crop before the first one is even harvested.
So there is an overlap. How does that work?
Yes. For example, you might have maize growing. Just as the maize reaches maturity and starts to dry down, its water needs decrease. So you go in and plant cowpea in between the rows.
The cowpea starts growing while the maize is still standing.
Right. By the time you harvest the maize, the cowpea is already established and growing. The soil is never left naked. It always has a cover, which protects it and suppresses weeds.
We also need to talk about what we are growing. The sources classify crops into a few buckets, but I was struck by the description of millets. They are often called the poor man's staple, which feels a bit derogatory because biologically they sound like superheroes.
The branding of millets has been unfortunate. Millets like sorghum, jowar, and pearl millet, bajra, are incredibly resilient. They are C4 plants.
C4, what does that mean?
It refers to a highly efficient photosynthesis pathway. Most plants, like wheat and rice, are C3 plants. C4 plants are better at converting sunlight into energy in high heat and low water conditions. They're just tougher.
So they're built for climate change.
They are absolutely built for a tougher world. They can grow in areas with low productivity, high heat, and harsh economics. They don't need the pampering that other crops do.
In contrast to the cereals.
Right. Rice and wheat are the starchy giants. They feed the bulk of the world, but they are divas. They need water, they need good soil, they need fertilizer. If the climate gets erratic, rice and wheat struggle. Millets just hunker down and survive.
And then the pulses, the legumes. You call them the diplomats of the soil in our pre-show chat.
They are. They pay their rent.
Wow.
Most plants just take nitrogen from the soil. It's a one-way transaction. But legumes like lentils, peas, beans have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria called rhizobia in their roots.
What does that relationship do?
The plant provides sugars to the bacteria, and in return, the bacteria pull nitrogen gas, which is useless to plants, out of the air, and fix it into a form of ammonia that the plant can use as fertilizer.
So they make their own fertilizer.
They make their own, and they leave some behind in the soil for the next crop. Growing pulses actually improves the soil fertility.
This brings us to the philosophy of how we manage all this. We hear organic thrown around a lot, but the text draws a distinction between organic farming and permaculture. I always thought they were basically the same thing, just no chemicals.
There is a significant nuance there. They share some principles, but their scope is very different. Organic farming is defined largely by what it excludes.
Right, it's a list of don'ts.
Don't use synthetic fertilizers. Don't use synthetic pesticides. Don't use growth regulators. It's a production system that relies on crop rotation, green manure, and biological pest control. The focus is on feeding the soil with organic fertilizers like compost and manure, not feeding the plant directly with chemical salt.
So organic fertilizers build up that humus we talked about.
Exactly. They improve soil structure and water retention. Inorganic fertilizers feed the plant, but they can degrade the soil over time. They also require a huge amount of energy to produce and release nitrous oxide, a potent greenhouse gas.
Okay, so that's organic. How is permaculture different?
Permaculture, coined by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren in 1978, goes a step further. It stands for permanent agriculture. It is not just a production method, it's a design system.
A design system? What are you designing?
Everything. It aims to mimic nature's patterns. It's about designing landscapes that are holistic and integrated. It integrates housing, community, water management, and agriculture into a self-sustaining loop.
So it's bigger than just the farm field.
Much bigger. In organic farming, you might still have a monoculture of organic corn. In permaculture, you would never have a monoculture. You would design a landscape where the chickens eat the pests from the orchard, the chicken manure feeds the trees shade the house in the summer, and the roof of the house catches the rainwater to irrigate the garden. It's about creating beneficial relationships between all the elements.
Speaking of designing ecosystems, we have to mention the Miyawaki method. This is a Japanese technique that is popping up in cities. The stats on this are wild. 10 times faster growth, 30 times denser. How is that possible?
It's fascinating. It was pioneered by the botanist Akira Miyawaki. The core idea is to recreate a native forest on a degraded piece of land, but to do it incredibly quickly. The secret is to plant dozens of native species very, very close together.
Much closer than you would in a normal forestry project.
Far closer. So they are crowded, they are fighting for their lives from day one. This intense crowding forces them to compete for finlight. It triggers a rapid upward growth spurt. Instead of growing wide, they shoot up.
It's like a race to the top.
It's a race. And because you plant so many different native species, canopy trees, subtrees, shrubs, it creates a dense, multi-layered native forest in a tiny fraction of the time a natural forest would take to regenerate. We're talking 20, 30 years instead of 200.
The notes mention a great example at the office of the CAG in New Delhi, an urban forest created right in the middle of the concrete jungle using this method.
It shows that you can bring complex ecology back into the most artificial environments if you understand the rules of the system. It's a powerful tool for regreening cities.
So we've got the soil, the crops, the techniques, but environmental issues don't stay on the farm. Soil erosion in one country can affect water quality in another, pesticides drift, climate change hits everyone. We need a way to manage this globally. Let's zoom out to the global architecture.
This is where we move from biology to bureaucracy, but it is vital bureaucracy. Without these frameworks, the tragedy of the commons would just destroy everything.
And at the center of this spider web is UNEP.
The United Nations Environment Program, based in Nairobi, Kenya.
Which I think is cool. It's one of the few major UNHQs located in the global south.
It is significant. UNEP is the Parliament of the Environment. It sets the global agenda. Its governing body is the UN Environment Assembly. This is the world's highest-level decision-making body on the environment. Ministers from all UN member states meet biennially to basically decide the fate of the planet's policy.
But the real big bang for environmental governance, the moment everything changed, was 1992, the Rio Summit, the Earth Summit.
The UNCED, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. Everything we deal with today in global environmental law traces its lineage back to Rio. It was a massive gathering.
What came out of it?
It produced the Rio Declaration and Agenda 21, which was this comprehensive blueprint for action on sustainable development. But most importantly for our discussion, it birthed the Big Three conventions.
The triplets.
Yes. The CBD for biodiversity, the UNFCCC for climate change, and the UNCCD for desertification. Three massive legal frameworks to tackle three of the biggest problems.
Let's look at that last one first, the UNCCD, because we were just talking about soil, desertification. I think when people hear that, they imagine the Sahara Desert just expanding like a giant wave of sand moving across a map, swallowing cities.
That's the movie version, but it's a misconception. Desertification isn't about natural deserts getting bigger. The convention's definition is very specific. It is the degradation of land in arid, semi-arid, and dry, subhumid areas due to human activity and climate variations.
So it's not sand moving in, it's the land dying where it sits. It's land that used to be productive grassland or savanna turning into barren wasteland.
Exactly. It's productive land turning into non-productive land. It's the soil losing its life, its structure, its ability to hold water. The goal of the UNCCD is something called land degradation neutrality.
Which means, sounds a bit jargony.
It means breaking even. The idea is to maintain the amount of healthy and productive land resources. So if you degrade land in one area for development, you must restore an equal amount of land elsewhere. The idea is to stop the net loss of healthy land.
The 14th COP Conference of Parties was actually held in New Delhi, and they focused heavily on land tenure, gender, and the Great Green Wall Initiative.
The Great Green Wall. It's one of the most ambitious projects on the planet.
Tell us about it. It sounds epic.
It is. It's an African-led initiative to grow an 8,000-kilometer natural wonder of the world across the entire width of Africa from Senegal to Djibouti.
A wall of trees.
A mosaic of trees, vegetation, grasslands, and sustainable farms. It's designed to hold back the degradation of the Sahel region, restore ecosystems, create jobs, and provide food security. It's hope planted in the ground.
Okay, moving to the second of the big three, biodiversity. The CBD Convention on Biological Diversity. This one feels huge. It covers everything from genes to ecosystems.
It is the most comprehensive agreement we have, and it has three main goals. 1, conservation of biodiversity. 2, sustainable use of its components. And 3, this is the tricky one, the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources.
That last part sounds like a legal minefield. Benefit sharing. What does that actually look like in practice?
It is a minefield. This is where the protocols come in. The convention itself is the framework. The protocols are the specific rules of the road. And this issue is addressed by the Nagoya Protocol. Right. So imagine a pharmaceutical company from a wealthy nation goes into the Amazon rainforest. They find a plant that the local indigenous people have used for centuries to cure headaches. The company takes the plant, synthesizes the active chemical, patents it, and makes billions of dollars.
And the indigenous people get nothing.
Historically, yes, that is called biopiracy. The Nagoya Protocol changes that. It says, no, you cannot just steal that genetic knowledge. You have to get permission, that's the access part, and you have to negotiate a contract to share the profits or technology, that's the benefit sharing part, with the country and communities that steward that resource.
That is incredibly important. It turns nature and traditional knowledge into a recognized asset for the people living there.
It's an attempt to level the playing field.
There's also the Cartagena Protocol, which deals with something straight out of sci-fi. LMOs, living modified organisms.
This is all about biosafety. We're talking about GMOs, genetically modified organisms. If a country wants to export a GMO, say a corn seed, modified to be resistant to pests to another country, the Cartagena Protocol dictates the rules.
And what's the core rule?
It operates on the precautionary principle, and specifically the principle of advance-informed agreement.
Meaning no surprises.
Exactly. You can't just ship it and let them figure it out. The exporting country has to provide all the scientific data, the risk assessment, and the importing country has the sovereign right to say, no, we don't think this is safe for our ecosystem. We're not allowing it in.
The CBD also sets targets. We had the Aichi biodiversity targets for 2011-2020. Spoiler alert for the listeners. We didn't do great.
We failed to meet most of them, unfortunately. It was a wake-up call. But that failure led to the new push, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which includes the 30 by 30 target.
Right, 30 by 30. Protect 30% of the Earth by 2030.
The goal is to protect 30% of the Earth's land and oceans by the year 2030. It's ambitious, but scientists agree is the minimum necessary to prevent ecological collapse and stabilize the biosphere.
And what's India's role in all this? How does this international law translate locally?
India passed the Biological Diversity Act in 2002 to meet its CBD obligations. It sets up a 3-tier structure, a National Biodiversity Authority, NBA, at the top, state biodiversity boards, SBBs, in the states, and crucially, biodiversity management committees, BMCs, at the local level.
So it goes all the way down to the village.
It's meant to. The BMCs are supposed to document local biodiversity and traditional knowledge in something called a People's Biodiversity Register, which then forms the basis for that benefit sharing we talked about.
Now, biodiversity isn't just about protecting land. It's about managing the marketplace. Because nature is for sale, unfortunately. We have a convention specifically for the traffic cops of the wild sites.
The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. This regulates the international border crossing of wildlife and wildlife products. It's one of the oldest and most powerful conservation agreements.
And it works through a system of appendices, basically different lists for different levels of danger.
3 appendices. It's a classification system.
Okay, walk us through the list. What's on the most critical list?
Appendix A is the do not touch list. These are species threatened with extinction. Think gorillas, sea turtles, giant pandas, tigers. Commercial trade in these animals or their parts is completely banned. You can only move them for exceptional circumstances like scientific research or conservation breeding, and it requires permits from both the exporting and importing countries.
So it's a red light. And Appendix 2.
Appendix 2 is a yellow light. It contains species that aren't necessarily threatened with extinction yet, but trade must be controlled to avoid utilization incompatible with their survival. This is the biggest list. It includes things like all corals, many reptiles, and certain valuable timber species.
So you can trade them, but you need a permit.
You need an export permit, and the exporting country's scientific authority has to certify that the trade will not be detrimental to the survival of that species in the wild.
And Appendix 3.
Appendix 3 is a bit different. This is a list of species that are protected in at least one country, and that country has asked other CITES parties for assistance in controlling the trade. It's a way for a country to say, hey, we're having trouble with people illegally exporting our walruses. Can everyone please help us check the paperwork?
And who is watching all this? Because passing a law is one thing, catching a smuggler with a suitcase full of ivory is another.
That's where traffic comes in. It's not a UN body itself, but a wildlife trade monitoring network, a joint program of WWF and IUCN. They are the detectives. They are a non-governmental watchdog.
So they're the intelligence agency for CITES.
A great way to put it. They gather the data, they track the illegal markets, they go undercover, they analyze seizure data, and they help CITES and national governments enforce the rules. They are the eyes and ears on the ground.
Animals don't know about borders, though. A bird doesn't know it's leaving a protected area in India and flying into a danger zone elsewhere. That's where the CMS comes in, the Convention on Migratory Species.
Also known as the Bond Convention. This protects the wanderers, terrestrial, aquatic, and avian. It covers everything from whales swimming across oceans to monarch butterflies crossing continents. If a species regularly crosses international borders, it falls under the CMS.
And how does it work?
It works through agreements and memorandums of understanding for specific species or regions. The notes mention the Raptor MOU, a specific agreement to protect 76 species of migratory birds of prey across Africa and Eurasia. India is also involved in conserving species, like the dugong and marine turtles under the CMS framework.
But I have to be honest, the thing that really stopped me in my tracks in this section was the mention of animal culture.
I'm glad you caught that. This is a profound and relatively new shift in conservation science.
I want to pause here because I read this section of the CMS notes 3 times. I thought I misunderstood it. The UN is now talking about animal culture. Because when I hear culture, I think of opera or language or maybe how to make a specific type of pasta. We aren't projecting that onto animals, are we?
We aren't. And this is one of the most exciting shifts in biology in the last 50 years. For a long time, we treated animals as wet robots. We thought their behavior was purely genetic, hard-coded instinct. You are born, you know how to migrate, you reproduce, you die.
The software is pre-installed at the factory.
Exactly. But the Convention on Migratory Species is now recognizing that for many intelligent, long-lived social species, this is profoundly wrong. They possess socially transmitted knowledge. They learn.
Give me a concrete example. What does culture look like for a whale?
Take sperm whales. They live in these tight-knit matrilineal clans. Research has shown that different clans speak different dialects of clicks. They have different hunting strategies that they use to hunt different prey. And this isn't genetic. A baby whale learns the dialect from its mother and grandmother. They learn the specific migration route that has worked for that family for generations.
So it's not instinct telling them to turn left at the seamount. It's grandma telling them or showing them.
Precisely. And here's why this matters for policy and why the CMS is taking this so seriously. Standard conservation says we have 10,000 whales. If we lose 50% of them, we still have 5,000. The species is safe because the gene pool is diverse enough.
The math says they are fine.
But if you wipe out the older individuals, the grandmothers, the matriarchs, you might preserve the genes, but you have destroyed the library. You've burned the maps. The survivors might literally not know how to find the best feeding grounds during an El Nino event because the only one who knew that information was the matriarch you just harpooned.
That is actually terrifying. It means extinction isn't just biological. It's cultural.
It is the destruction of non-human knowledge systems. And the CMS is trying to figure out how to legislate that. How do you protect knowledge as a conservation target? It adds a whole new layer of moral urgency.
That really changes how I look at a flock of birds or a pod of dolphins. Let's land the plane, or rather land the bird in the water. Wetlands. The Ramsar Convention.
The oldest of the modern global intergovernmental environmental agreements, signed in Ramsar, Iran in 1971. It's often called the Waterfowl Convention because it started with a focus on protecting habitats for migratory water birds.
But it's broader than that now.
Much broader. Its mission is the wise use of all wetlands, lakes, rivers, marshes, estuaries, even coral reefs. Countries that join have to designate at least one wetland of international importance, or Ramsar site.
And they have a naughty list, too, the Montreux Record.
It's the emergency room list. The Montreux Record is a register of Ramsar sites where changes in ecological character have occurred, are occurring, or are likely to occur due to pollution, development, or other human interference. If a site goes on this list, it's a cry for help. It flags the site for priority conservation action.
We have a success story here in India with Chilika Lake.
Yes, Chilika in Odisha is a brilliant example. It's a huge brackish water lagoon. It was placed on the Montreux Record in the 90s because of siltation issues. The mouth of the lake was choking up, the salinity was changing, and the biodiversity, including the dolphins and fish stocks, was crashing.
So what happened?
The government and local communities rallied. They dredged a new mouth to the sea, restored the natural tidal flow, and the lake bounced back with incredible resilience. It was successfully removed from the record in 2002. It shows that restoration is possible.
On the flip side, Keoladeo National Park in Rajasthan is still on the list.
Yes. Keoladeo, the famous bird sanctuary, remains on the record due to water shortages and invasive species issues. So, work to be done. Conservation is never finished.
Okay, we've done land, we've done animals, we've done water. Let's look up the atmosphere, and specifically the chemicals we pump into it.
Right.
We have a rare W in the wind column here, the ozone layer.
The Vienna Convention and the Montreal Protocol. This is widely considered the most successful international environmental treaty in history.
So Vienna was the setup, and Montreal was the spike.
That's a good way to put it. The Vienna Convention 1985 was the framework. It was a bit soft. It said, we agree this is a problem, and we agree to study this and exchange information. Montreal 1987 was the teeth. It had binding, time-targeted commitments. It mandated the phase-out of ozone-depleting substances, ODS, specifically chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs.
Those were in everything, refrigerators, air conditioners, hairspray.
Yeah, everything. And the world actually did it. We developed substitutes, we changed our industries, and we phased them out. The science is clear, the ozone hole is slowly healing, but there's a plot twist. A bit of a monkey's paw situation.
There always is.
To replace CFCs, the industry switched to HFCs, hydrofluorocarbons. Now, HFCs are great for the ozone. They don't destroy it at all. But it turned out they are super potent greenhouse gases.
How potent?
Thousands of times more potent than CO2 at trapping heat, molecule for molecule. So we saved the ozone layer, but accidentally turned up the thermostat on the climate.
Oops.
Big oops. So the world went back to the drawing board, and using the successful framework of the Montreal Protocol, they created the Kigali Amendment.
An amendment to the amendment, basically.
An amendment to the protocol, yes. This agreement, reached in Kigali, Rwanda, phases out HFCs. It is estimated that this single amendment could reduce global warming by up to 0.5 degrees Celsius by 2100. That is a massive chunk of avoided warming.
It's amazing how we fix one thing and break another. Speaking of breaking things, let's talk about toxins. Pollution. There are two terms here that sound similar but are very different. Bioaccumulation and biomagnification. This always trips me up. Help us distinguish them.
Okay, let's break it down. Bioaccumulation is what happens in one individual organism over time. Think of it like a savings account for poison.
An unwelcome savings account.
A very unwelcome one. If a fish swims in water contaminated with traces of mercury, it absorbs a little bit every day. The mercury binds to its fatty tissues and doesn't leave. So, an old fish has much more toxin in its body than a young fish. It accumulates over its lifespan.
Okay, so that's the individual. What is biomagnification?
Biomagnification is what happens across the food chain. It's the multiplier effect. Let's do the math. Imagine a tiny plankton absorbs 1 unit of a toxin like DDT. A small shrimp eats 10 plankton. Now, the shrimp has 10 units of DDT in its body.
Okay.
A small fish eats 10 of those shrimp. Now the fish has 100 units.
Oh.
A big tuna eats 10 of those small fish. The tuna now has 1,000 units. And then a bird of prey or a human eats the tuna.
So by the time it gets to our plate, the concentration is magnified 1,000-fold.
Exactly. The toxin becomes more and more concentrated as you move up the food chain. That is biomagnification. This is why top predators like eagles and polar bears are so vulnerable to these pollutants.
This is why we have conventions specifically for these chemicals,
right?
Like for mercury.
Yes, we have the Minamata Convention on Mercury. It is named after the devastating public health tragedy in Minamata, Japan in the 1950s. A chemical factory dumped methyl mercury into the bay.
I remember reading about this. It was horrific.
The cats in the town started dancing strangely and falling into the sea. Then people started getting sick, horrific neural damage, numbness, birth defects. It was a nightmare. The convention is a global agreement to control mercury releases from things like gold mining, coal plants, and even old dental fillings.
And then we have the dirty dozen, the really nasty stuff.
The Stockholm Convention on POPs, persistent organic pollutants. These are chemicals like DDT and PCBs. They're called persistent because they don't break down in the environment. They last for years, sometimes decades, and they travel.
The grasshopper effect, right?
Yes. They have this unique property where they evaporate in warm climates, travel in the atmosphere, and then condense and fall back to Earth in cold climates. This is called long-range transport. We find high levels of POPs in the fat of polar bears and indigenous communities in the Arctic, thousands of miles from where any pesticide was ever sprayed.
It's a chemical ghost that haunts the planet.
That's a very good way of describing it.
And while we are trying to regulate these things, companies are trying to regulate their image. Let's talk about greenwashing.
Greenwashing is a huge issue. It's when a company, or even a country, spends more time and money claiming to be green through advertising and marketing than actually implementing business practices that minimize environmental impact. It's deceptive.
Like the Volkswagen emissions scandal.
A classic textbook case. They marketed clean diesel to the world, running ads about how environmentally friendly their cars were, while secretly rigging the software in the cars to cheat on emissions tests. On the road, they were pumping out illegal levels of nitrogen oxides, 40 times the legal limit.
They were collecting awards for being green while actively poisoning the air.
That is the essence of greenwashing.
So how do we measure the mess, really, on a national level? In India, there's an index for this, CEPI.
The Comprehensive Environmental Pollution Index. It's a tool developed by the Central Pollution Control Board. It assigns a number from 0 to 100 to industrial clusters.
And what does the number mean?
It looks at multiple factors: air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, and the potential health impact on people living there. It aggregates all that data into a single score.
And what's the threshold?
If the score is over 70, the area is categorized as critically polluted. If it's between 60 and 70, it's severely polluted. It's a red flag that says to regulators, stop, we cannot add any more industry here until we fix the existing mess. It's a crucial tool for identifying the hotspots that need urgent action.
So let's try to pull all this together. We've been on a huge journey. We started with the microscopic structure of soil horizons, the OAE layers. We went through the geometry of intercropping and the apartment building farms. We looked at the massive UN bureaucracy trying to hold back deserts, manage trade in endangered species, and protect biodiversity.
Then we went up into the atmosphere to look at the ozone layer and down into the food chain to trace the path of invisible chemicals.
It is, as we said at the start, an interconnected web. You cannot fix the biodiversity crisis if you don't fix the soil crisis. Healthy soil is the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems.
And you can't fix the soil if you are dumping POPs and mercury into the water that irrigates the crops. You can't protect the migratory birds under the CMS if climate change driven by HFCs and other gases regulated by a different treaty is destroying their habitats at both ends of their journey.
It's overwhelming, but also knowing the structure, the global architecture, the specific conventions makes it feel a little less chaotic. There are specific levers to pull. There are rules.
There are. And the most important lever is understanding how they all fit together. You can't just be an expert in sites anymore. You have to understand the UNCCD and the Stockholm Convention, too.
Before we go, I want to circle back to that concept of animal culture. It's stuck in my head. If animals have culture knowledge, teaching, social learning, then extinction isn't just a biological loss, it's something more.
It's not just a biological loss, it's an informational loss. It's an ethical loss. If we destroy the habitat of a migratory elephant herd or hunt the oldest whales in a pod, we aren't just killing biological machines. We are erasing a civilization that is older than ours.
A non-human civilization.
A non-human civilization. We are burning a library of knowledge that tells the story of how to live on this planet, knowledge that has been passed down for thousands of generations, and we don't even know what we're losing. If that doesn't make you want to fight for these conventions and these soil profiles, I don't know what will.